Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. We got a World War III alert. But before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, we thought we was going to have peace out of Trump. Trump told us all about peace. But then why are you warring with Yemen? Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform. Let's get into the content tonight.
Confirming to ABC News that U.S. air and naval assets hit dozens of Houthi targets in Yemen, including missiles, radar, drones, and air defense systems. The airstrikes were carried out by fighter jets in the northern Red Sea, this less than 2 weeks after the president signed an executive order redesignating the Houthis a foreign terrorist organization. For more now, let's bring in ABC News contributor and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East, Mick Mulroy, and ABC's Perry Russum from our Washington bureau. Mick, I want to start with you. What's the latest on these strikes as we hear one U.S. official telling our Pentagon reporter that the administration is characterizing today's attacks as an opening shot against the Houthis and also sending a strong message to Iran?
That's right, Morgan. I think many expected this. The Trump administration had signaled that they were going to take a much heavier hand against the Houthis from their attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea and also U.S. military assets. And I think today was that substantial attack, dozens and dozens of targets hit.
Oh, that's what y'all say. Yeah, so you say. But the Houthi rebels are saying that you reap what you sow, and you shouldn't have did that. They say wait on them to get their get back. Anybody shoot at them getting shot back at. Did you get the message? I'm just here to report the news. So this is the U.S. See, they all in on it too. The news, they want Trump to project strength because he just was begging Putin not to deal with those NATO Nazi terrorists over there in Ukraine. So today he looked tough. He's bombing Yemen. This is to show Yemen you're not going to be able to defeat Yemen dropping bombs. You can only kill innocent people. If you really want to teach Yemen a lesson, Mr. Trump, declare war. Send your troops to Yemen. That's how you really can show Yemen. If Trump really want to show Yemen and Iran that he not playing, then you're not going to be able to just bomb in the air, brother. Send your troops.
You mentioned by F-18s specifically coming off the USS Harry Truman. And I think this was also, as you mentioned,
but they don't want
a signal to the Iranians. They're trying to get them to come to the table to talk about potentially a new agreement on nuclear weapons.
You can't be killing people in Yemen to get Iran to do nothing. What the hell are you talking about? You heard them? This is to send a message to Iran. What message? Iran say, you know where they stay? Bomb Iran if you want to talk to Iran. Trump, this is imperialism. This is not right. You might become a war. You can become a war criminal. Not Mike. You will become a war criminal doing shit like this, Mr. President Trump. Did you know? Did they do this and you didn't know? Because I seen you put out a letter on your social media. Sometimes I think there's other people you just taking credit for. But you're talking real tough, beating your chest. You know? I'm telling everybody right now, the Houthi rebels not afraid of the U.S. military. Please. You couldn't even beat the Taliban. The Taliban don't got hypersonic missiles. The Taliban don't got the weaponry that the Houthi rebels got. Hey, I'm not here to bash the U.S. military. You know, they're Americans. But you lost to the Taliban. Are we to believe, Mr. Trump, that U.S. is going to go defeat the Houthi rebels? Hell no. And the Houthi rebels wish they would see any American troops. You're just flying over people dropping bombs. That's kind of cowardly.
And they haven't shown any interest. So this might be both. One, to mitigate the threat from the Houthis, and also to send that message.
And Mick, let's put a pin on that, and let's go to Perry really quickly, because President Trump now posting on his social media platform a message to the Houthis, warning that if the attacks don't stop, quote, hell will rain down on you like nothing you have seen before. What are you hearing on that front?
He just trapped himself. Y'all heard it? If you don't stop attacking those ships, Hell is going to rain down on the Houthi rebels like never before. He is going to get trapped into that, just like he was trapped into. Remember, I thought hell was going to rain down on Hamas if they didn't release all the hostages. They didn't release them all, and it definitely was no hell raining down on Hamas. Trump, we see now, he a one-trick pony. God damn. That's all he got. That's all he got. Is if, you don't do this, everybody die. Then if the people don't do it, you got to kill everybody, Mr. Trump. I can guarantee you, Yemen, the Houthi rebels are going to continue to do whatever the fuck they want to do over there in the Red Sea. And it's Trump who have backed it. And guess what? Now Iran, even Russia, even China, because they play a part in this. I'm going to get to that. We're going to be seeing that. Guess what all of them are doing? Rubbing their hands like Birdman. Now they can send, they want the U.S. to fight the Houthi rebels. Like in Vietnam. Go get your butt whooped in a forever war in Yemen that will weaken the U.S. economy, weaken the U.S. military, and end the U.S. empire. Trump is falling for a trap.
Yeah, strong words from President Trump, not just for the Houthis, but Iran as well, with Trump saying their support for the Houthi terrorists must end immediately, saying if they do not, America will hold you accountable. Then back to the Houthis, Trump says the U.S. will use overwhelming lethal force until we have achieved our objective, which leads to the question of how long these attacks will go on, Morgan.
Well, Mick, to Perry's point, tell us what you know about the Houthis' threats in recent days to resume targeting ships related.
You see these armchair generals? How long will these attacks go on until the Houthi rebels sink one of those U.S. warships out there with one of those advanced hypersonic missiles? Till a couple of them ships get sunk, and then he might learn his lesson, or he might declare war, and then it get worse. You see, I already told people, if you're looking for some people willing to die for this shit, you found them. If you're looking for some people willing to die for their religion and believing they're going to meet Allah, you know, in paradise, the Houthi rebels are those people. Millions of them. They want to fight the U.S. That's what they want. They want you to stop being cowards and actually declare war. That's what they want. Then they really can grab you by the belt, like the Vietnamese said, and deal with you.
Related to Israel and the Red Sea, as we've seen after Israel continued to blockade in Gaza. We know that there have been more than 100 attacks on vessels in the Red Sea since the October 7th attack. And this is one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. I mean, kind of put it in perspective for us. What's at stake here?
Sure, yes. So the Houthis do claim it's in response to the recent issues in Gaza, but I can point out that even before the war started in Gaza, the Houthis were doing many of these same things. It's just now grown very intense. And a lot of the world's energy, about 40%, comes out of this region, mostly going to the Indo-Pacific. So this is something that the world should care about because it seriously disrupts commercial traffic.
No, this is not something the world should worry about. They're only targeting shipping going to Israel or shipping dealing with the U.S., Britain, or France, because they got the ships out there trying to attack their country. The world, that's not the world. So the only people should be worried about that is Britain, France, the U.S., Israel. They can't stop the Houthi rebels. Donald Trump falling for a terrible mistake. I bet there's a bunch of generals in the U.S. military know it's a big mistake. Why? Because they lost to the Taliban. How the hell they going to defeat the Yemeni rebels?
Is how we carry energy around the world.
And Mick, we know that you'll be following this pretty closely. Perry, while I have you, I want to turn to President Trump because he signed some executive orders last night seeking to eliminate 7 federal agencies. What more do we know about that?
Yeah, so we got rid of several government groups. They include the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness and the Institute for Museum and Library Services. He also did some President Biden mandates, including one for solar panels and another one that raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour for federal
dangerous development that we had, which is the attack in Sana'a. There was an attack in Sana'a in a civilian quarter in Yemen, targeting innocent civilians. 9 were killed and 9 were wounded. These were some of the attacks that took place in Yemen, civilian locations. Some more explosions here, and that's followed. It's saying that no, they actually targeted, well, bases for Ansarullah in Yemen. And Donald Trump, he had statements too. Donald Trump, after these attacks, he came up with multiple statements. He had a post online saying that, well, I ordered today the United States military to launch decisive and powerful military action against the Houthi terrorists in Yemen. They have waged an unrelenting campaign of piracy, violence, and terrorism against American and other ships, aircraft, and drones. Joe Biden's response was weak, pathetically weak, so the unrestrained Houthis just kept going. It has been over a year since the U.S. flagged commercial ships safely sailed through the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, or the Gulf of Aden. The last American warship to go through the Red Sea 4 months ago was attacked by the Houthis over a dozen times. Funded by Iran, the Houthi thugs have fired missiles at U.S. aircraft and targeted our troops and allies. These relentless assaults have cost the U.S. and world economy many billions of dollars, while
Trump done fell for a trap, the Middle Eastern trap. He can't stop the Houthi rebels from doing that. They got hypersonic weapons. None of those Navy warships can do it. He beating his chest, but as they continue to do what they do, he gonna have to what he gonna do? Because you're not gonna be able to stop it by just sending jets. One of those jets gonna wind up getting knocked out the sky. What he gonna do? He gonna declare war on Yemen? That's gonna be bad news for the U.S. military.
At the same time, putting innocent lives at risk. Well, you chose to take the path of the main country defending a genocidal entity and preventing a total legit embargo from being implemented against them. Instead of you taking action, you chose to be on the wrong side of history, as usual, the United States. The Houthi attack on American vessels will not be tolerated. We will use overwhelming lethal force until we have achieved our objective. The Houthis have choked off shipping in one of the most important waterways of the world, grinding vast swaths of global commerce to a.
What it's really about? Trump want the Red Sea. Yeah, all that stopping. Trump want his hands on their ports. That's what he want. Trump is doing this, and then he gonna try to, mark my word, he gonna try to negotiate with these people at the end of this to get those ports. This is all about stopping China and Russia, Iran from having those ports. You think he's slick? I know what's going on. I just now read that. Okay.
Well, halt and attacking the core principle of freedom of navigation upon which international trade and commerce depends. Now he's saying they're carrying out aerial attacks on bases, leaders, and missile defenses to protect American shipping. Well, so far only civilians have been killed.
We got some information.
And he's telling them, to the Houthis, your time is up and your attacks must stop starting today. If they don't, hell will rain down upon you like nothing you have ever seen before. And then he's warning Iran too, saying that the support of the Houthis must end immediately. Do not threaten the American people, their president, who has received one of the largest mandates in presidential history. So Donald Trump is threatening. But the response came very quick from Ansarullah. Ansarullah, multiple officials from them, they said that Trump is weaker and lower than threatening the people of Yemen. Trump is a weak and low individual. And we will continue our operations in the Red Sea. And actually, we will escalate so long as Trump continues targeting us, and his ships and fighter jets will be targeted. And we will.
So they don't escalate. You think they woofing? You think they? Oh, so Syria, they woofing, right? They acting like. I mean, so Yemenis, they acting like they gonna escalate? No, they're gonna do that. They're gonna up the ante. They're gonna force Trump. They want to actually fight the U.S. They wishing Britain come over there, France, somebody. You just keep flying in the sky. I put this on everything. They want your boots on the ground so they can really wipe your ass out.
We will return one attack with two. We will return one hit with two hits, one blow with two blows. This is what we will do to them, according to Ansarullah. So from their perspective, well, they're not that worried. They're not that worried. And, well, they have proved that they are not worried because, well, they've had so many attacks being conducted against them by the genocide coalition, by the United States and by the UK and by Israel too. And in their statements today, they did mention the three names, the US, the UK, and Israel. They did not exclude Israel, which means that they're preparing. Of course, this attack is an escalation. The attack, well, there's a very high likelihood that Israel is applying pressure. Israel has been applying lots of pressure on the United States for the past couple of days. The Daniel Davis appointment as a deputy head of the spying in the United States taken away. Adam Bowler forced to resign. Many statements taken back. Clearly, there's an inner battle, and there are people who are very close to Donald Trump who are staunch zealots, Zionists, who are with him, trying to hinder any prospect of development, any sort of shifting, especially with Adam Bowler saying, like, we're not an agent of Israel. Of course, Israel would, of course, have this pressure on the United States to start attacking Yemen. But from a Yemeni perspective, that's not really going to affect them. What is it going to do with them? It's actually going to make them even more keen, because Yemen, well, they've never considered anything to be a loss when they got into the Battle of Al-Aqsa flood and started to have these attacks in the Red Sea, beginning with one phase and leading up to 5 phases. Eventually, before the ceasefire took place, they reached what they labeled as Phase 5, which included, in many cases, daily ballistic missiles on Israel, apart from the embargo that was constantly expanding, at one point to reach the Mediterranean too. Then the drones targeting very sensitive security and military bases inside of Israel, and nothing fazed them. Israel attacked twice, very heavy attacks that were supposed to be a show, lots of fire coming out, oil locations, but they still did not stop. They continued. The United States and the UK, aka the Genocide Coalition, they carried out many attacks against Yemen. That didn't stop them. But there are two things to understand from this attack of the United States. Firstly, well, the United States didn't give a lot of time to start attacking. So before the United States started taking action against Ansarullah beforehand, well, it took some time to try and gather a few countries. Initially, they wanted to form an international coalition. That proved to be a massive failure. And by the way, this coalition was supposed to be formed of at least 9 countries, if you remember. But some of these countries only sent like an observer, ended up with the most dedicated countries for Israel, Britain and the United States of America, leading this genocide coalition for the sake of a genocidal war criminal entity. And they failed, because Ansarullah, well, they ended up expelling 4 US aircraft carriers. They attacked ships, they attacked destroyers, they targeted over a dozen, they took down over a dozen of the MQ-9s of the United States, worth hundreds of millions, targeted some of their fighter jets too. And despite every attack that came out against them, nothing stopped them. And with their statements, by the way, if you read out some of the statements that are coming from Yemen, they are not really taken aback by anything. They don't have any sort of worry. Financial leverage was a thing that the United States tried to implement against them. At one point, like what the reports from Yemen said, through Saudi Arabia with some embargoes. Then Yemen started to have certain warnings showing that, well, we can start to carry out attacks against Saudi Arabia too. You knew what we attacked before. Then they continue until the last second. This attack coming from the United States now is most likely going to speed up the process of Yemen escalating, by the way, and potentially starting to have direct attacks inside of Israel. Because from their perspective, they know how things work. They're not really looking at the United States attack on Yemen from a US perspective only. No, they know that the United States is doing this on behalf of Israel, at the request of Israel, for the sake of Israel. No more than that. So that could actually lead to a case where Yemen is starting to actually target Israel directly. Now that there are more breaches as well coming from Israel, they can argue that Israel broke the ceasefire and that they're actually killing civilians again. They can argue that the genocide is continuing inside of Gaza, because one of their considerations before to restrict the attacks in the Red Sea would have been that Israel is having a blockade on Gaza and not allowing any aid in. So Yemen could argue, well, okay, we'll have a blockade on you. Now, well, 19 people in 48 hours, they can target Israel easily and say, well, okay, well, you're still massacring people, so no more. That's it. We're attacking you. And the main eyes with the attack on Yemen and the main threat with the attack on Yemen is going to Iran. That's why both Donald Trump and Marco Rubio, they mentioned Iran. They warned Iran from attacking Yemen. Although Iran clarified previously many times that the movements that they support, they have their own independence. It's not as if, Iran clicks a button, all of a sudden everyone is listening. No, they have their independence. They have their own operations, like what the Palestinian resistance did. And the immediate participation, for example, from the Lebanese resistance on the 8th of October. Likewise, later on with Yemen. Time proved that, Iran, it's known that they have leverage to an extent, but it proved that they have a lot of leverage on any actions coming from Iraq, and they do have a very high leverage on Hezbollah, despite the argument, internally from Hezbollah about the level of effect coming from Iran. However, when we talk about Hezbollah in Lebanon, they religiously follow the supreme leader in Iran. It's part of their faith, the supreme leader of Iran. So there was a bit of leverage there. But with Yemen, it's as if Yemen is completely at liberty of doing anything they want. I mean, some people argued that, of course, that, we have no direct evidence of that was an argument and an analysis that was put out there by some, that Iran did try and apply some sort of leverage with Yemen, try and say, okay, well, we're going to reach an agreement at one point, maybe we try and decrease the level of attacks. If these, again, reports were accurate, I'm not saying that they were, and that also hasn't worked. From the tone that's coming from them, it appears that Yemen, they have a very large level of independence, very big level of independence, and their attacks might well escalate very soon in Israel. And this is something that can potentially increase to other escalations, by the way, because the Yemeni attacks on Israel, they were very serious. And Israel took them very, very seriously. That's why they carried out 2 very high-risk attacks and long-distance attacks against Yemen, over approximately 2,000 kilometers. In Israel, after they conducted these attacks, they said, we were very thankful that we returned all of our fighter jets. So they were expecting that they might have some sort of an attack when they went to Yemen. So very tense, very, very tense days. From the ceasefire perspective, no breakthrough so far to go into phase 2. The latest developments are, the United States is still applying pressure or trying
China, Russia, and Iran are calling for an end to U.S. sanctions on Tehran over its nuclear program. Beijing and Moscow also reaffirming their support for Tehran's rejection of U.S. calls for fresh nuclear talks.
These talks is another reason Trump bombed Yemen. He got to bomb somebody weak that it's not going to be no immediate retaliation that could immediately get to World War III. He couldn't go just bomb Iran and could all the way went down. So they picked Yemen. Putin looking real tough right now. They picked Yemen because China and Russia and Iran just had that meeting. They say it's time for the U.S. to stop bullying Iran and putting sanctions on Iran. So Trump decided to attack Yemen.
基于相互尊重的政治外交接触和对话，是唯一有效可行的选项。我们强调，有关方应致力于消除造成当前局势的根源，摒弃制裁施压、武力威胁。
China's top diplomat says the comprehensive agreement on the Iranian nuclear issue, this was inked in 2015, was an important achievement, but is now at a critical juncture. The Kremlin, meanwhile, has called for further diplomatic efforts while condemning what it considers illegal sanctions on Iran. Iran's deputy foreign minister describing the talks as constructive, reiterating that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. Beijing and Moscow giving their support to fully respecting what they see as Tehran's right to the peaceful use of nuclear energy. The 2015 deal had been intended as a curb on Iran's nuclear activities, with sanctions relief offered in exchange. But Washington withdrew from that agreement during US President Donald Trump's first term in 2018. Now, back in office, he's seeking a new deal, one that Iran is rejecting unless sanctions are first lifted. And from what CNE's Tan Yuguan joins us live from Shanghai. Yuguan, Chinese Prime Minister Wang Yi reportedly coming up with a 5-point proposal after the meeting with the Iranian deputy foreign minister. What are these 5 points?
Well, essentially, Wang Yi is trying to solve that chicken and egg question, right? Whether sanctions should be lifted first or whether talks should come first. And as far as Wang Yi is concerned, he feels that sanctions should be lifted first. So first of all, he says that peaceful resolution should be through there should be peaceful resolution through diplomatic and political means, while opposing the use of force and illegal sanctions. Now, he says this will create dialogue and create the conditions for dialogue and avoid actions that can escalate the situation. He also asked for Iran to respect its commitments to the treaty, including its commitments to not make nuclear weapons, but as well for all other parties to respect Iran's rights under the treaty that Iran should have the right to nuclear energy. Now, next, number 3 on the list, he asked for all parties to negotiate a new consensus based on the framework of the earlier agreement on Iran's nuclear issue. Wang Yi says China hopes that all parties will meet each other halfway and resume dialogue as soon as possible. He also called on the US to show political sincerity to return to the talks. Now, number 4 on the list, he asked for a promoting of cooperation through dialogue and opposing the intervention of the UN Security Council. Wang Yi argues that such an intervention by the Security Council will not help build trust or even bridge differences. He warns that restoring sanctions could undo years of diplomatic progress and urge all parties to act with caution. Last but not least, he asked for step-by-step reciprocity and consensus building through consultation. Wang Yi emphasizes that mutual respect is essential for finding common ground, which should accommodate the legitimate concerns of all parties and meet international expectations. To sum up, Wang Yi advocates resolving the Iranian nuclear issue through peaceful dialogue that upholds the rights and obligations of Iran.
Yuguan, of course, China is playing host at this particular meeting. It has increasingly become much more of a player in the Middle East, of course, famously mediating that rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia in 2023. Now it is getting involved in trying to resolve the Iranian nuclear issue. What's in it for China?
Well, China does have quite a few reasons to want a peaceful Middle East. Politically, the region, Iran is a strategic ally as a member of the BRICS grouping. China is also a signatory to the 2015 deal as well as the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So it aligns with China's long-held expressed desire to want to see a peaceful resolution to the Iranian nuclear issue. What's more, China also has enough economic problems of its own, and an unstable Middle East can drag its economy down. The Middle East, after all, is a major energy producer, and an oil crisis can trigger a global recession. What's more, China imports lots of oil and gas from Iran itself. Besides, the Middle East is also right smack in the middle of China's Belt and Road Initiative, especially the land corridor linking China to Europe. This corridor is strategically important to China because it allows it to bypass the maritime choke points like the Strait of Malacca. Wei Su?
Thanks, Tan Yu Guan there reporting live from Shanghai as Beijing place hosted a meeting for
Gaza is now approaching the 2-week mark. But for Israel, the 4-day mark has now been reached and ignored. And now they're going to pay a price for that, a price they full well knew they were going to pay for that. Because whilst Benjamin Netanyahu's relationship with the truth might be a loose one, where it comes to Gaza, the same cannot be said of the Houthis in Yemen, who have now formally resumed their blockade of Israeli shipping in the Red Sea and surrounding waters. The Houthis had, of course, issued a 4-day ultimatum to Israel to allow humanitarian...
Trump, once again, protecting Israel, started attacking Yemen. But Yemen is carrying out war. He's going to have to enter this war.
...aid back into Gaza after they arbitrarily blocked it in order to force an extension of Phase 1 of the ceasefire deal on Hamas, when Hamas wanted Phase 2 negotiations to begin, as both sides had originally agreed. Israel breaking their word and compounding that by committing further war crimes. Where the world sits on its hands, the Houthis have not. Their 4-day ultimatum having expired yesterday, they're warning that failure for Israel to comply would result in the resumption of their maritime blockade. With the deadline now passed, the Houthis have made good on their word, reigniting a crisis that has far-reaching implications, as much economic as military for Israel, but they've invited it, choosing to continue to use starvation as a weapon in Gaza. So what comes next? Netanyahu's government have brought on themselves. Right, so let's start with the situation in Gaza as it currently stands before we get on to the Houthis, because this is, after all, their justification for renewing their blockade of Middle Eastern waters to Israeli shipping right now, as the Strip has endured almost 2 weeks now of aid being blocked completely from entering, frustrating so many people around the world no end that Israel are allowed to do it, and still no censure comes aside from lip service and bland criticism, which is just water off a duck's back to a war criminal like Benjamin Netanyahu. A statement issued by the Union of Municipalities of the Gaza Strip, issued in the last few hours at time of writing, reads, Gaza is facing a comprehensive humanitarian disaster due to ongoing power outages and the closure of crossings. In light of the continuous humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip, caused by the devastating Israeli aggression that has lasted for 16 months, the Union of Municipalities of the Gaza Strip reiterates the urgent need for a sustainable and sufficient supply of water and electricity. This is particularly critical after the central desalination plant was forced to shut down due to power outages caused by the Israeli occupation. This has put the lives of Palestinians at risk and exacerbated both the health and environmental crises. We condemn the recent decision by the Israeli Minister of Energy and Infrastructure, as well as the ongoing power outages in Gaza since the beginning of the aggression. These actions have deprived the residents of Gaza of their primary energy source, paralyzing essential services, particularly in the sectors of health, water, and sanitation. Desalination plants, sewage treatment facilities, and many other municipal services have ceased operation, increasing the risk of epidemics and the spread of diseases. We assert that the continuation of these punitive measures against civilians constitutes a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. It only serves to worsen the suffering of Gaza's residents, who are already enduring the worst humanitarian crisis in history. The denial of entry for construction materials, spare parts, machinery, and alternative energy systems has severely limited the municipality's capacity to find effective solutions deepening the crisis and threatening the collapse of vital services. The Union of Municipalities of the Gaza Strip urgently calls on the international community, humanitarian organizations, and all relevant parties to intervene immediately. We demand the secure and sustainable supply of electricity, fuel, and water, as well as the entry of essential equipment and materials necessary to keep municipalities operational and to prevent further health and environmental disasters that threaten the lives of more than 2 million people trapped in Gaza. Says it all, really, doesn't it? And it is against that backdrop that the Houthis in Yemen at least have said enough is enough. Their recent ultimatum to Israel was a direct response to that total blockade of humanitarian aid into Gaza, which has now been in place for almost 2 weeks. A 4-day opportunity given to Israel to lift the blockade, or the Houthis would return to blockading Israeli shipping. Israel have ignored this, so the Houthis have now resumed their stance against Israeli shipping. How much difference this will actually make at this point is actually a matter of debate, as much of the shipping that was already rerouting itself around Africa to avoid the Red Sea and the Suez Canal never actually resumed their original shipping routes on the basis that the shipping companies had little faith that Israel would behave honorably and see through this peace plan, much like the rest of us who are observers of this crisis and have been for some time will have felt as well. And they've been sadly proven right as much as we have. But with their time up, the Houthis have issued a statement too. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, God Almighty said, and if you return to sin, we will return to punishment. And we have made hell for the disbelievers a prison. God Almighty's truth. In support of and victory for the oppressed Palestinian people and their dear Mujahideen, and after the expiry of the specified period of the deadline granted by Sayyid Abdul Malik Badr al-Din al-Houthi, may God protect him, to the mediators to push and pressure the Israeli enemy to reopen the crossings and bring aid into the Gaza Strip, and in view of the inability of the mediators to achieve this, the Yemeni armed forces confirm the following. First, resuming the ban on the passage of all Israeli ships in the designated operational area of the Red and Arabian Seas, as well as Bab el-Mandeb and the Gulf of Aden. Second, this ban shall take effect from the time of announcing this statement. Third, any Israeli ship attempting to violate this ban will be targeted in the declared area of operations. Fourth, this ban will continue until the crossings to the Gaza Strip are reopened and aid and food and medicine supplies are allowed to enter. The Yemeni armed forces salute the steadfast Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank and affirm that with God's help, they will stand by the valiant Palestinian resistance. So Israel need only start letting the aid in again and the Houthis will start leaving their shipping alone again. Should any shipping heading Israel's way choose a Red Sea route. I've not heard of a Houthi attack just yet, but it is still early days after all. The Houthis have a proven track record, of course, of targeting Israeli shipping, and their ability to disrupt maritime traffic in these critical waterways is well documented, all despite them not actually having a navy of their own. By issuing this ultimatum, the Houthis sought to leverage their military capabilities to pressure Israel into complying with international humanitarian law. However, Israel's response to the ultimatum was one of defiance. Despite widespread condemnation from the international community, including the United Nations, the European Union, and numerous human rights organizations on top, Israel has continued to restrict the flow of aid into Gaza. This is a blatant violation of the ceasefire agreement brokered earlier this year, but then Israel are now trying to change that unilaterally anyhow, which is also going against the grain of what they themselves had previously agreed to, because their word truly is worthless. By flouting this agreement, though, Israel has not only deepened the suffering of the Palestinian people, but also undermined efforts to achieve a lasting peace in the region, and now invited the wrath of the Houthis once more down on their heads. And of course, they can escalate from just shipping, as we well know as well. They are more than capable of reaching Israel itself with drone and rocket attacks, which Israel has struggled to react to previously. So could we see further escalation as Israel continue to ignore this? I wouldn't bet against it. During previous blockades, the Houthis employed a combination of drone strikes, missile attacks, and naval mines to target Israeli ships. These actions have had significant economic and military consequences for Israel, as well as the US and the UK, who have had their shipping, including military warships, attacked too. The disruption of shipping routes for trade, however, has led to increased insurance costs, delays in the delivery of goods, the costs of goods rising in Israel, and heightened tensions across Israel, as you might imagine, as life becomes more expensive for everyone. As a result of that, the Houthis' actions have drawn attention to the vulnerability of Israel's maritime structure. The reliance on sea trade with nations beyond the Middle East for their economic prosperity is well documented now. raised questions about the country's ability to secure its trade routes in the face of threats to it. And certainly nobody managed to stop the Houthis previously through means of aggression, and they tried plenty of times. The Houthis just carried on each and every time, though. The resumption of the blockade also underscores the growing role other nations in the Middle East can have in shaping the dynamics of these regional conflicts, especially Israel-instigated ones. The resumption of the blockade also underscores the growing role other nations in the Middle East can have in shaping the dynamics of regional conflicts, especially Israeli-instigated ones. The Houthis, despite being a relatively small and resource-constrained group based in one of the poorest nations in the Middle East, have demonstrated their ability to challenge a powerful state like Israel and succeed in doing it, and taking on the US and the UK and anyone else who fancies a bit besides, it seems. Better fit more nations take a leaf out of their books as Israel's destabilization of the Middle East spreads. Meanwhile, it isn't only Israel the Houthis necessarily have in their sights right now either, as they've come out against the unelected Syrian government of al-Qaeda leftovers led by Ahmed al-Sharaa for the massacre of ethnic minorities that has been happening there too. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't already, to ensure you don't miss out on
A few days ago, the Russian military released a very interesting video showing the moment of the incident between a Russian Su-30SM fighter jet and an American F-15 Eagle, in the skies over the Syrian Arab Republic. According to the Russian military, this incident occurred in 2021, in the skies over central Syria. As it turned out, the American pilots behaved very brazenly in the Syrian skies, and often violated sector boundaries. As a result, the Russian command gave the order to bring the American pilots to their senses, and make them behave more modestly. The published video captured the exact moment when the American pilot attempted again to breach the sector boundaries. However, this time, the pilot was unsuccessful. The Su-30MS was dispatched to intercept the American fighter. The footage clearly illustrates how the Russian fighter jet took the initiative in the aerial confrontation with the American F-15 from the very beginning. The Russian pilot succeeded in overpowering his American counterpart, and gaining the tail position of the F-15, locking onto the US fighter jet. This position is considered a victory in aerial combat, as the opponent's aircraft can be easily destroyed even by conventional thermal missiles. The footage shows how the American pilot is desperately trying to escape from this deadly trap. However, he failed to do this. As a result, the American pilot admitted defeat. The footage shows how he stopped resisting, leveled his fighter jet, and left that sector. It is noteworthy that after this incident, American pilots stopped violating sector boundaries while on patrol.
peace report for day 524 since October 7th. It's ceasefire day 54, such as it is, as Nora reported off the top. It's not much of a ceasefire at this point. It's been structurally violated by Israel in dozens, scores of ways, more than 1,000 times since it went into effect. And phase 1 expired and was supposed to roll over to phase 2. That was guaranteed. The guarantors of that agreement are the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, and Israel has violated that. And the most pronounced violation, besides the murderous violations that Nora reported on at the beginning of the show, and we've been covering here for the last month, is that on March 2nd, the Prime Minister's office in Israel announced a total blockade on goods, supplies, and goods and supplies to Gaza as the phase 1 of the deal expired, a total blockade in violation of the ceasefire that was agreed upon. So in response to these violations by Israel, Ansar Allah and the Yemeni armed forces, who have observed the ceasefire since day 1, announced the resumption of their naval blockade against Israel. Their naval blockade began in November 2023 in solidarity with Gaza. They said they would not remove that naval blockade, which is against ships going to port in Israel or Israeli-linked ships, until the siege on Gaza ended. They, in good faith, observed the ceasefire that went into effect January 19th. And as Brigadier General Yahya Sari said this week, this blockade will continue until the crossings to Gaza are reopened and humanitarian aid, including food and medicine, is allowed to enter. So let's take a look at some of the map. We've got some mapping resources, and we'll take a little bit of a look back at the way that this has unfolded since November 2023. So we're looking at the key corridors. Of course, Israel's up there in the upper left. In the bottom center there, you see Yemen, and you see, crucially, the Bab el-Mandab Strait. Off the Gulf of Aden there into the Red Sea. That is one of the choke points off the Yemeni coast that the Yemeni armed forces have enforced the blockade through. The two main ports in Israel are through the Red Sea that you see up running from right to left up your map there. You can see it moving in at the top of the Red Sea. That goes into the port at Eilat in southern Israel. And of course, if you go to the left there, you cross the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean and you reach the port of Ashdod, which is just north of Gaza. So that is the map that we're looking at. The main targeting area that Ansar Allah and the Yemeni armed forces are talking about is the Bab el-Mandab Strait there between Djibouti, between Africa and Yemen there, that you see that choke point, a historic choke point of trade and area of operations that is relevant to what we are talking about today, that key transit point. If we look at the next map, we can see an events map. This is from the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Tracker, a political violence tracker. They have logged the events. You can see 164 events ending through the week of March 7th. And you can see the dots there in the Bab el-Mandab Strait, where much of the targeting is. They log the 136 attacks. It should be said that these are not attacks. They're not full frontal attacks on shipping. The ships are warned, they're diverted, there's warning shots that make up the vast majority of those 136 attacks that are listed. Those attacks also include attacks on U.S. naval vessels, military vessels, patrolling in the area as well. There's been at least 6 frontal assaults on U.S. aircraft carriers in the area. But for as far as shipping is concerned, it is a warning not to travel through the area. Of course, this began in November 2023. People may remember when the Galaxy Leader, an Israeli-owned ship, was boarded and taken over by the Yemeni armed forces and its crew. held captive in good conditions. We saw lots of videos of them in support, in solidarity with what was happening in Gaza. And that ship, the Galaxy Leader, the first day of the ceasefire in Gaza, the Galaxy Leader crew was released. There's been a single fatal attack in March 2024. 3 sailors were killed, but other than that incident, this has been effectively there has been no other casualties in this. 30 ships have been damaged after they ignored multiple warnings. And this is all takes place under the Naval Blockade Task Force of the Yemeni Armed Forces. They call it the Yemeni Armed Forces Humanitarian Operations Coordination Center. And they research and get intelligence on ships. Because the ships change flags, fly flags of convenience, try to disguise their ownership and their destinations. And when those ships that have done that arrive in port in Israel, they're then warned when they're in port in Israel that they have been notified of being sanctioned. And the Yemeni Armed Forces stress that if they persist in this multi-layered warning system, then they are targeted. And they stress that they use the methodology of the US-Saudi blockade on Yemen, the brutal naval blockade on Yemen that matched with the war, the Saudi-US war that began in May of 2015. So they're using criteria that was used against them, a blockaded country, to use against Israel in a humanitarian intervention that they say matches international law's requirements on stopping genocide, on intervening in a genocide that's going on. If we look at this next map here, we can see this is an attack chart map. You can see the number of vessels over the course of the 16 months since the war in Gaza began. And if you look at the line graph in the upper left corner, tracking it across the screen, you can see that transits through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait have gone below half, from 2,000 down to below 1,000, according to the Lloyd's List Intelligence, Lloyd's of London List Intelligence. They're down from 2,068 crossings in November 2023 to 877 1 year later. So they've had a material impact on shipping in the region to Israel. The attacks have carried out in a number of phases. They have been escalated as the war escalated. They went from Israeli-owned ships to ships that were servicing Israeli ports, to British and UK ships. Once the Brits and the Americans started bombing onshore in Yemen, they expanded this. And of course, in the final phase, Yemen began targeting Israel with drones, targeting Israeli soil with drones and ballistic missiles. We've, of course, covered that on the Resistance Report for the last year and a half. Of course, Yemen has been the subject of more than 700 American and Israeli airstrikes on their territory as well during this time, which have killed orders of magnitude more than the 3 sailors that have been killed during this naval blockade. If we look at the next map, you can just see, or the next graph, you can just see it's pretty obvious when the blockade, the Yemeni Armed Forces blockade begins. You can see vessels through the Suez Canal drop off. You can see car carriers, which are the main source of the port at Eilat on the Red Sea. The Israeli port of Eilat is a car carrier port. You can see those drop to virtually zero. And you can see in the upper right corner the change in transits through the Suez Canal of valuable cargo. So you can see the car carriers are down by more than 90%, virtually 100%. You can see the crude tankers, crude oil tankers are down by more than 50%. And you can see the bulk LNG, liquid natural gas carriers down 70%. So significant material impact of this blockade, which is also a political action to press other countries to join. In December, at the port of Eilat, the chief executive told Reuters, this is December 2023, right after the beginning of the blockade, that that arrivals had dropped 85% at the port of Eilat. By March 2024, they're talking about 0 vehicles arriving at the port. And by July 2024, they're talking about bankruptcy at the port. The port CEO is talking to the Knesset's Economic Affairs Committee, saying that there had been no activity at the port for 8 months and no revenues at all coming in. So the ceasefire allowed the resumption to some degree of these, but now it is back in effect. And it went into effect with a video that we're going to show here in a moment, where that the Yemeni armed forces published "Siege for a Siege," it's called. And you're going to see Ansar Allah political leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi declare, he's going to say, "We declare to the world, we will give a 4-day deadline for the entry of aid into Gaza." This was earlier this week, end of last week. And it says on screen that it's a 4-day deadline. And Abdul Malik al-Houthi says, "We will resume our naval operations against the Israeli enemy. Our message is absolutely clear. We will respond to siege with siege." But it's a solid information operation. So we're going to watch that video in its entirety now.
أجمع أننا سنعطي مهلة 4 أيام.
Trump fell into the trap. Yemen never go for that bullshit.
استئناف عملياتنا البحرية ضد العدو الإسرائيلي. كلامنا واضح تماما، ونقابل الحصار بالحصار.
So yeah, solid information operations, letting everybody know what's happening. They showed there in that video 2 ships have been sunk. 2 ships have been sunk during this blockade. And Abdul Malik al-Houthi on Monday said that we granted the 4-day deadline. The deadline is to allow the mediators to continue their efforts. If after those 4 days, the Israeli enemy persists in preventing the entry of aid into Gaza and maintains complete closure of the crossings and continues to block the entry of food and medicine into Gaza, we will resume our naval operations in the area of responsibility that we showed you on that map earlier. Abdel Malik al-Houthi said, "It is the responsibility of Arab and Islamic governments to ensure the entry of aid into Gaza and to ensure that they exert maximum pressure to make it happen. We remind Arab and Islamic governments of their responsibility to be held accountable, knowing that many of them are indifferent to the ensuring of aid entry into Gaza." So a message, political message, a material message, a demonstrative pressure on other governments to to not allow this blockade of Gaza to continue. The expiration of that 4-day threat ended this week, and the naval blockade went into effect at midnight on Wednesday. So they gave time to prepare. And if we look at this next slide, you can see also that they issued this warning here, which you see an hourglass at the top. You see a ship with the 4-day warning, and then the ship being targeted underneath. Yahya Sari, Brigadier General Yahya Sari of the Yemeni Armed Forces, said in support of, this is what he said at the deadline at the end of the 4 days at midnight on Wednesday. He said, in support of and in victory for the oppressed Palestinian people and its dear fighters, and after the expiration of the deadline granted by Saeed Abdul Malik Badruddin al-Houthi to the mediators to pressure the Israeli enemy into reopening the crossings and allowing aid into Gaza, and due to the mediators not being able to achieve this, the Yemeni armed forces confirm the following. First, the resumption of a ban on the passage of all Israeli ships in the designated area of operations, which includes the Red Sea, the Arabian Sea, Bab el-Mandab, and the Gulf of Aden. Secondly, this ban takes effect immediately from the moment of this announcement, which was yesterday at midnight, Wednesday at midnight. Number 3, any Israeli ship that attempts to break this ban will be targeted within the declared area of operations. And number 4, this ban will remain in place until the crossings into the Gaza Strip are reopened and humanitarian aid, including food and medicine, is allowed to enter. The Yemeni armed forces salute the steadfast Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank and affirm that, with God's help, they stand alongside the valiant Palestinian resistance. And Islamic Jihad and Hamas both welcomed the announcement, underscoring the unity of fields. Islamic Jihad said, the Islamic Jihad movement in Palestine praises the statement issued by the Yemeni armed forces in which they announced the resumption of their operations against the Zionist entity ships in the Red Sea and Arabian Sea. This bold step aims to pressure the entity and its sponsors to reopen the crossings and allow humanitarian aid into the besieged Gaza Strip. We welcome this courageous stance, which reflects the authenticity and bravery of the Yemeni people in supporting our brothers in Gaza and backing the cause of the Palestinian people and their resistance. It affirms the unity of the position against the occupation and against oppression. Through this announcement, the Yemeni people have demonstrated their unwavering commitment to supporting the Palestinian people and standing by the resistance in the face of this ongoing Zionist aggression. So obviously noted by the resistance factions in Gaza that this blockade is one way, and the world has been silent on this, as we've been reporting on the show throughout, and this is the one state, Yemen, that has been speaking up in defense and acting in defense of the blockade on Gaza. So that is the blockade. The Yemeni armed forces have also been busy with their second war, which is with U.S., and they downed another Reaper drone. If we look at slide number 7, this is Ansar Allah versus the United States Air Force MQ-9 Reaper drone over Hudaydah, Yemen. This is at least the 13th drone downed since October 7th. You can see it there being blown up. And the 16th since 2017, U.S. Central Command acknowledged that it had lost contact with the Reaper over the Red Sea. Again, Brigadier General Yahya Sari said, our air defenses have successfully shot down a hostile American MQ-9 aircraft while it was violating Yemeni airspace and carrying out hostile missions over the airspace of Al Hudaydah Governorate. And according to the Yemeni Armed Forces, this is the 15th aircraft that our air defenses have successfully downed since the battle began. So that is another $30 million Reaper drone. And in the next slide, I made a little mixtape for you guys showing the 10 other parts of the 10 other downings of the Reaper drones that have happened.
Those are
in
advanced.
the last year. So we're basically talking about essentially one a month. We have had confirmation of at least 12 of them, and Central Command admits to at least 12. This one that I just showed was the 13th. And these are in previous, over the last year. I've shown you all these drone strikes, all these dropping of these drones. These are MQ-9 Reapers, $30 million drones. They're armed drones. They carry 2 500-pound bombs, 8 Hellfire missiles, and we have seen these drones downed with those weapons intact, which means that the Yemenis have access to reverse engineer those weapons. And again, the agreed upon cost, generally the agreed upon cost is 33 million per unit of these drones, although the United States Air Force original construction cost was 50 million. And so we're watching here on your screen about $500 million in US drones being shot out of the sky by locally made, locally assembled at least, surface-to-air missiles that the Yemeni armed forces has been using. We believe they're to be carrying these out with the 358, which is a surface-to-air missile that has cruise missile and loitering munition capabilities in it, and they've been used, as we've seen, to devastating effect. It's believed that Hezbollah was using those to take down Israeli drones during the war in Lebanon. Although, again, we're not seeing the actual weapon being used. So they have been interdicted by U.S. Navy vessels, again, in their blockade of Yemen. And we have seen those parts, and we saw footage of the 358 at a Iranian weapons show that was attended by the Russians. But there's no direct confirmation that that's the weapon that is being used. But as you can see, it is a very effective tool. And these drones are, like I said, they're armed. They're carrying out surveillance missions for the onshore attacks that are carried out by fighter jets that take off from the aircraft carriers. And if we look at number 9, you can see how the Americans respond to this. This is Stars and Stripes, the U.S. Armed Forces media. This is how they responded to the one this week. The first drone I showed you was this week being taken down. And the headline is U.S. drone lost over the Red Sea on the same day as the Houthis claim MQ-9 Reaper downing. And in that article, it's a pretty classic way that the U.S. has dealt with this. A U.S. military MQ-9 Reaper drone disappeared over the Red Sea the same day Houthi militants in Yemen claimed to have shot one down. Claimed, they showed us on video. U.S. Central Command lost contact with the drone on Monday, said the official, who spoke on the condition of anonymity. The day given by the official coincides with one in an X post by the Houthis, where they had downed a Reaper on a coastal region of Yemen with a surface-to-air missile. It's unclear whether the Houthis were responsible for the loss of the drone. They were responsible for the loss of the drone. And if we look at the next slide, I also wanted to point this out. The battle between the Yemeni armed forces and the U.S. aircraft carriers also led to this in December, which we didn't get a chance to report on, but I wanted to bring your attention to it while we're doing this coverage of Yemen. The U.S. shot down its own fighter jet during an attack by the Yemenis on the Truman aircraft carrier that you see there in that photo. They shot down an F-18 Super Hornet, a $70 million jet with a $2.5 million interceptor missile. These interceptor missiles are used to shoot down the Yemeni drones that cost roughly the amount of a family car. The SM-2s are 2.5 million, but they also fire SM-3s at these incoming drones and cruise missiles that are fired at the warships, and the SM-3s can range from $9 to $30 million for the interceptor, for a single interceptor missile. So you see the asymmetric warfare financially revealed financially happening between the Yemeni armed forces and the Americans. And there's been, like I reported earlier, there's been 6 direct confrontations with U.S. aircraft carriers patrolling in the area. And a senior Pentagon official told Fox News that so far the Navy has shot down and intercepted all of the missiles and drones fired at their warships, but sometimes the interceptors have occurred only seconds before impact. There have been numerous close calls, and the U.S. Navy, in essence, has been at war in the Red Sea for the past 2 years, facing near constant attacks by Houthi ballistic and cruise missiles and drones, and firing expensive SM-2 and SM-3 missiles to counter the Houthi harassment. Senior military leaders believe that it is only a matter of time before one of these missiles hits a U.S. naval vessel and can cause extensive damage to an aircraft carrier or to the destroyers that are in the aircraft carrier strike group. An aircraft carrier is a $4.5 billion piece of weaponry, and the aircraft carrier strike group has 2 guided missile destroyers, 2 anti-aircraft warships, and 1 or 2 anti-submarine destroyers and frigates. So these billion-dollar outlays to fight against the Yemeni armed forces, and again, so this shows you that they shot down their own jet. They claim they shot down their own jet.
I don't believe that.
There's an investigation that has not been released yet into that. The pilots ejected safely from their $70 million jet. But this was a story that we didn't get to cover, and I wanted to put this on the radar. And just to come full circle, number 14, the MQ-9s, the Reaper drones, are not simply off the shore of Yemen. This is an illustration from a flight tracker from the New York Times showing that these MQ-9 Reapers are also over Gaza. The Reaper drone can fly for 24 straight hours, and you can see the path, the flight path from early in the war of these MQ-9 Reapers. They fly at about 26,000 feet over Gaza, just doing these loops. And of course, we know that the US and Israel operate a fusion center where military intelligence from the US is gathered and logistics is given to the Israelis. So this whole war all along has been a US-Israeli war on Gaza, but these Reaper drones really showcase that. So I just wanted to bring that in full circle. And that is the update from Yemen on the blockade. And that is the resistance report for this week, day 50.
Welcome back to World Affairs in Context. Thank you so much for joining me today. An important diplomatic event just took place in Beijing. China hosted a trilateral meeting with Russia and Iran to discuss Iran's nuclear program and the lifting of US economic and financial sanctions. This meeting actually comes amid escalating tensions, as you may know, with US President Trump having sent a letter to Iran's supreme leader threatening military action against Iran unless Iran halts its nuclear program. Again, Iran is a sovereign nation, and it is quite odd to think that a letter of that nature and written in that tone would yield any positive or meaningful results in terms of bilateral relations and in terms of restoring relations between the two countries. Whether or not it's possible is another question, of course, but still, threatening military action is very much a taboo. One would only do that, of course, to escalate tensions. In response, China, Russia, and Iran have called for the resumption of multilateral nuclear talks and the lifting of US sanctions. Additionally, the meeting in Beijing took place in the context of the International Atomic Energy Agency expressing concerns earlier this month about Iran's uranium enrichment activities. The agency effectively voiced concerns because it believes Iran's enriched uranium might be approaching weapons-grade levels. They don't have any confirmation of that, but this is what the agency claimed. Whether or not this concern, quote unquote, was politically motivated or encouraged in other ways remains unclear. Now, before we move any further, it is very important to point out that the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT in short, is an international treaty that is aimed at preventing the spread of nuclear weapons and promoting peaceful uses of nuclear energy. The NPT has three main objectives: non-proliferation, disarmament, and the peaceful use of nuclear energy. As of today, 191 countries are parties to this agreement, making it one of the most widely adhered to arms control treaties in the entire world in history. There are 5 countries recognized under the NPT as nuclear powers. They are Russia, the United States, China, the UK, and France. Now, here's the main point. There are countries that possess, or let's put it diplomatically, are thought to possess nuclear weapons that are not part of the NPT treaty. These countries are Pakistan, Israel, India, North Korea, and likely South Sudan, although this last one is questionable, I believe. So with regards to Iran, during the first presidency, President Trump made a decision to withdraw the United States from the agreement under which Iran, under President Raisi at that time, agreed to self-imposed limitations on its nuclear program in exchange for the lifting of Western sanctions, which would allow it to develop its economy and to grow. Trump withdrew despite the fact that the international agency issued a report. It was an independent report indicating that Iran fully complied with all requirements of that agreement at that time. So it was the US decision not to move forward with the agreement. In recent weeks, the Trump administration made a rather questionable, one might argue, attempt to restart negotiations with Iran. And here's why it was questionable. President Trump said in an interview that if Tehran did not want to negotiate with the United States would have to, quote, intervene militarily. So could that statement be regarded as a form of coercion? It is quite possible, and I'm sure that's exactly how it would be perceived by any foreign state. So in response, Iranian President Pezeshkian said that they would not be able to negotiate if Iran is coerced by the other party, effectively declining the proposal in its current form. Nobody wants to be forced to do anything. The meeting held in Beijing signaled that the global majority supports Iran's right to use nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, and I want to underscore that, for peaceful purposes, and its compliance with the United Nations Security Council resolutions. Following the meeting, a joint statement was issued in which Russia, China, and Iran called for an end to, quote, illegal and unilateral sanctions against Iran, as well as threats of force. They emphasized that mutual respect ought to be the basis for diplomatic solutions moving forward. China and Russia advocating for economic sanctions on Iran to be lifted is a very important step. This is something that would have been shocking 5 or 10 years ago. Now we see that global powers become more assertive and multipolarity has already arrived. It is here, and they're becoming more assertive, and they're actually standing up to attempts to bully them. China also separately rejected suggestions made by Britain and France that they might join forces to reimpose the United Nations sanctions originally lifted under the 2015 deal. So, in my opinion, the meeting was a very important step towards showing the world that multipolarity enables countries to align and to find common causes and to align on common priorities and to promote peaceful ways to resolve conflicts. Here's Foreign Ministry spokesperson on China, Russia, Iran, Beijing meeting on the Iranian nuclear issue. Take a look.
伊朗核问题深入交换意见，并发表联合声明，重申政治外交接触和对话是唯一有效可行的选项，呼吁有关方摒弃制裁施压、武力威胁，避免采取升级局势的行动。三方还重申不扩散核武器条约的重要性。中俄欢迎伊朗重申其核计划的和平性质，不寻求发展核武器，支持伊朗与国际原子能机构继续合作，强调要尊重伊朗和平利用核能的权利的。
This trilateral event was also important from the standpoint of understanding that neither Russia nor China nor Iran view military activities as a feasible solution to the current challenges. Despite what we are told here in the mainstream media in the West, the three countries once again emphasize that diplomacy and peace matter. Tehran's securing support of Russia and China indicates that global centers of power are indeed shifting, and this goes beyond purely economic realities and purely economic interests and financial challenges that the BRICS Plus bloc is focusing on. This is indeed a structural shift towards a multipolar world and hopefully a more peaceful world. China, Russia, and Iran are full members of the BRICS Plus bloc, as you know. Last week, they held naval exercises in the Gulf of Oman, which I believe is an annual event. This is nothing extraordinary. The trilateral meeting held in Beijing reflects that the three countries are indeed strengthening their relations and are moving forward in a cohesive way. And of course, there is an attempt to coordinate policies to counter US policies that attempt to interfere in their domestic affairs and in the affairs of sovereign nations and coerce them to act a certain way. Iran, Russia, and China once again emphasized the importance of diplomacy in the multipolar world. Hopefully, the other side will take a note and actually understand what this meeting means. Thanks for watching. I hope that this quick update was interesting. Remember to show your support, like
Greenland. What is your vision for the potential annexation of Greenland and getting them potentially?
Well, I think it'll happen. We need that for international security, not just security, international.
When it comes to the high north and the Arctic, you are totally right. The Chinese are now using these routes. We know that the Russians are rearming. We know we have a lack of icebreakers. And we know things are changing there, and we have to be there.
What if I told you the biggest geopolitical hotspot in the world is a place you've probably never thought of before? But as we speak, great powers are scrambling for control, forging alliances with regional players, and doing everything they can to secure military and economic dominance over one of the most strategically vital regions on Earth. That region is the Arctic, and right now, a major geopolitical battle between China, Russia, and the United States is emerging before our very eyes. The Arctic, which spans the entirety of the Earth's North Pole and covers 4% of the Earth's surface, has long been considered too inhospitable to be of geopolitical relevance. But global warming is changing everything. As ice sheets retreat year after year, two massive opportunities are opening up: vast, untapped deposits of natural resources and new maritime trade routes that were once completely unnavigable, routes that dramatically outperform traditional shipping corridors. And as history has shown time and time again, when a new strategic region emerges, the United States will do whatever it takes to dominate it. But this time is different. Unlike Iraq, Latin America, or any of the US interventions of the past 30 years, Washington is facing great power resistance. The Arctic has become a proving ground for the new multipolar world order, where US hegemony is no longer guaranteed and rival powers are staking their claims. The world is shifting, and historic great powers are waking up and returning to the stage. Russia, despite the West's best efforts to cripple it, is set to achieve all of its stated objectives in Ukraine while leaving Europe's economic growth in the dust. Meanwhile, China has cemented itself as the manufacturing superpower of the world, leading the high-tech sector and rapidly proving its military dominance. The Arctic is the next great fault line in this new world order. A region that was once frozen and forgotten is rapidly becoming the center of global competition. And in today's video, we're breaking down exactly what's at stake, who the major players are, and how this battle for the Arctic will shape the future of geopolitics. Stay tuned, because this is a story you don't want to miss. The Arctic region spans the territories of Canada, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Russia, Sweden, and the United States. Historically, these nations never prioritized their Arctic claims, simply because the region's harsh conditions made it nearly irrelevant. But now, that's all changed. As the Arctic's vast economic and strategic potential has become undeniable, countries are scrambling to expand or solidify their territorial claims. This rush for influence led to the creation of the Arctic Council, a forum for Arctic bordering nations to coordinate on regional affairs. But if you take a look at the map of member states, you might notice a country that seems completely out of place: China. Despite being thousands of miles from the Arctic, China has aggressively pushed for involvement in Arctic diplomacy, even branding itself a near-Arctic state. It's a bold move, but one that makes perfect sense when you understand what's at stake. So why does China, and even countries like India, care so much about the Arctic? Because this isn't just some frozen wasteland. This region is emerging as one of the most strategically valuable in the world. The future of global manufacturing, energy security, and trade depends on three things: access to critical minerals, a steady energy supply, and fast, secure shipping lanes. And the Arctic has all three. In short, this is shaping up to be the geopolitical prize of the 21st century. The first major prize in the Arctic is its vast reserves of rare earth minerals, critical resources that power the technologies of the future, from AI-driven robotics to advanced weaponry, electric vehicles, and renewable energy. Right now, China dominates this industry, controlling 60% of global rare earth production. But even more crucially, China processes 90% of the world's supply, giving it an almost unbreakable grip on the entire supply chain. For the United States, this is a massive strategic vulnerability. China has already demonstrated how devastating rare earth restrictions can be. On December 3rd, 2024, Beijing banned the export of key rare minerals, including gallium, germanium, antimony, and super hard materials to the US in a direct response to Washington's semiconductor sanctions. These materials are essential for producing semiconductors, advanced electronics, military technology, solar panels, and EV batteries. And just like that, American supply chains were thrown into chaos. The reality is, for many of these minerals, there simply isn't a viable alternative within US-friendly nations. Even when allied deposits exist, China has a near monopoly on the process to refine them, leaving America with sometimes literally no other choice, leading to skyrocketing prices. This is exactly why the Arctic, specifically Greenland, has become a top geopolitical target. Under its retreating ice sheets lies one of the world's largest untapped deposits of rare earth minerals, a potential game changer for breaking US dependence on China's supply chains. And no one has fixated on this more than Donald Trump. Greenland, which in his mind was likely seen as nothing more than a frozen, barren landscape, suddenly became one of Trump's top strategic objectives. At his joint address to Congress, he made his ambitions clear. We need Greenland for national security and even international security, and we're working with everybody involved to try and get it. He even made a direct pitch to Greenlanders, promising, "We will keep you safe, we will make you rich, and together we will take Greenland to heights like you have never thought possible before." His son, Donald Trump Jr., took things even further, visiting Greenland and declaring they and the free world need safety, security, strength, and peace. This is a deal that must happen. MAGA, make Greenland great again. But there's one big problem. Greenland isn't up for sale. Denmark, which maintains sovereignty over the island, has fiercely rejected every US attempt to acquire it, dating back to Trump's first proposal in 2019, having the Danish Prime Minister calling Trump's interest in buying Greenland absurd. But that hasn't stopped Washington from pushing forward. The US has deployed every tool in its imperial playbook, from backing Greenlandic independence movements to outright military threats. Yes, you heard that right. Trump has refused to rule out using military force to gain control of Greenland, all while Denmark remains a NATO ally. And while rare earths are the immediate prize, America's ambitions in Greenland go far beyond minerals. Controlling the island would give the US a critical foothold in its larger mission to contain China, which leads us to the second major strategic asset of the Arctic, the rise of new global shipping lanes. But before I reveal this to you, give me 60 seconds of your time, as I want to introduce you to a tool I've been using in my personal life that has completely changed my entire online experience. Today's video sponsor is Proton Pass, and it's simply the best tool I've found to help me manage the enormous amount of online passwords and information I need to use every day. Before I found Proton Pass, I literally managed my online passwords in the notes section of my phone. This was not only unsafe and vulnerable to online hackers, but it's just incredibly inefficient. Now I simply remember one master password, and Proton Pass manages my entire online life by automatically filling them across my devices, helping me to never forget a password again and save time. Now, there are many password managers available, but here are 3 reasons why I personally chose Proton Pass. Number 1, unbreakable encryption. Proton Pass safeguards not just your passwords, but also sensitive login details, personal information, and confidential notes with end-to-end encryption, ensuring your most critical information remains secure from adversaries. Number 2, dark web. Proton Pass lets you receive immediate alerts if your personal information is compromised by a data leak on the dark web. And number 3, elite security features. With built-in 2-factor authentication, custom PIN protection, and Proton Sentinel's AI-powered threat detection, you stay ahead of cyber threats, even if a password is compromised. If you are still manually remembering, or even worse, writing down your passwords in 2025, it's time to upgrade your life. Simply visit proton.me/CyrusJansen to get 60% off the Pass Plus plan. Now, for most of human history, the Arctic was completely off limits for maritime trade, with thick ice sheets covering the region for the majority of the year. But with rising ocean temperatures, those ice sheets are retreating, revealing something that has been a dream for maritime navigators for centuries: a viable Arctic shipping route. This passage, which primarily runs through Russian and Canadian waters, is poised to revolutionize global trade by offering a dramatically shorter path between East Asia and Europe. Take China's shipping route to Europe as an example. Traditionally, Chinese vessels must navigate through the South China Sea, squeeze through the narrow Strait of Malacca, and then journey thousands of miles through the Indian Ocean and the Suez Canal before finally reaching European markets. The complete journey takes 30 to 40 days and traversing 20,000 kilometers or 12,400 miles. The Arctic route takes 20 to 25 days and is 14,000 kilometers or 8,700 miles long. This slashes this time by 10 to 15 days, making it 30 to 40% shorter than the Suez route, all while saving millions of dollars in time and fuel. And with Arctic ice melting at an accelerating pace, the window for ice-free navigation is expanding every year, potentially becoming ice-free in the summer by 2040. For China, this isn't just about efficiency. It's about survival. As the world's factory, China is projected to control 45% of the global manufacturing by 2030, while the US share dwindles to just 11%. When you produce nearly half of the world's goods, having safe, efficient shipping routes isn't just a luxury, it is a necessity. And in any future conflict between China and the United States, Beijing knows exactly what Washington's first move would be: a naval blockade. The US would weaponize its control over key maritime checkpoints, like the Strait of Malacca, to strangle China's economy by cutting off its vital trade routes. That's why the Arctic is so crucial to China's long-term strategy. Unlike its traditional trade routes, the Arctic Passage allows Chinese ships to bypass US-controlled waters entirely. Instead of sailing through American defensive umbrellas, Chinese vessels can travel almost exclusively through friendly Russian waters, ensuring that in a time of crisis, Washington can't simply cut off China from the global economy. Understanding just how vital this route is to its economic security, Beijing has wasted no time in securing its position in the Arctic. China has poured billions into Arctic infrastructure, investing heavily in Russian ports, icebreaker fleets, and energy projects to ensure that this passage becomes a fully operational trade corridor. In fact, China has already branded this route the Arctic Silk Road, a direct extension of its massive Belt and Road initiative. Just like the ancient Silk Road connecting China to Europe across the vast Eurasian continent, this new Arctic passage is set to be the cold, icy highway of the 21st century, carrying Chinese goods straight into European markets. And naturally, all of this is a massive win for Russia, which is a dominant Arctic power. Moscow has been eagerly working with Beijing to develop this route, knowing full well that controlling the Arctic Silk Road strengthens its economic, and strategic position in this new multipolar world order. Russia has wasted no time in securing its dominance over the Arctic and is doing so with a sheer force of infrastructure. Russia has invested heavily into rail and airports connecting the region, as well as pipelines and oil refineries. In total, Russia's new Arctic projects will be the biggest oil projects in the world and will require an incredible $150 billion in investment and will create 100,000 new jobs. Moscow has also built 8 massive nuclear-powered icebreakers. These behemoths are designed to clear a path through the Arctic's remaining ice sheets, leading convoys of Chinese cargo ships safely through the newly emerging trade routes. Russia stretches over 53% of the Arctic Ocean coastline, and it's not just empty land. Around 2.5 million Russians live in the Arctic, accounting for nearly half of the total population in the entire Arctic region. And with the polar ice retreating year after year, the strategic advantages for Russia are only growing. Beneath these thawing ice sheets lies an absolute goldmine of resources. The Arctic holds an estimated 90 billion barrels of undiscovered oil and a staggering 1,669 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. That's 13% of the world's undiscovered oil and 30% of its untapped natural gas reserves, much of it which sits directly within Russian claimed territory. This is a game changer for Moscow. Russia is already one of the world's leading energy exporters, and with the Arctic's untapped reserves now coming into play, it is poised to dominate global energy markets even further. China and the global South's rising demands for energy to fuel their rapidly growing economies aligns perfectly with Russia's Arctic ambitions. The deepening energy partnership between Russia and China, combined with the broader BRICS alliance, means that these energy-rich Arctic reserves won't just power Russian industry, they will supercharge the rise of the global South. But with such high stakes, tensions are inevitable. Looking at the map of the 8 Arctic nations, Canada, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Russia, Sweden, and the United States, one fact stands out immediately. Every single one of them, except Russia, is a NATO member. That means that Russia is completely surrounded by an alliance that has actively worked to undermine and contain it for decades. And as we've seen with NATO, Russia has no hesitation in expanding its presence right up to Russia's doorstep. And now, with the Arctic becoming a critical geopolitical battleground, we're seeing the exact same pattern unfold. Both NATO and Russia have been ramping up the military investments in the region, increasing the number of bases, Arctic war games, and military patrols. The Arctic is now a frontline in the struggle for the new world order. And as tensions escalate, this region is quickly becoming another flashpoint where NATO and Russia are on a direct collision course. The Arctic has officially become the next great geopolitical battleground. What was once a frozen, desolate region ignored for most of human history has now transformed into one of the most strategically vital arenas in global politics. At the center of this race stand the 3 dominant players of the modern world: the United States, China, and Russia. Each has a vested interest in controlling this region, but their strategies couldn't be more different. The US is doing what it always does, trying to impose its dominance through NATO militarization and pressure campaigns, even on supposed allies like Denmark. Russia, with its sheer geographic advantage, already controls more of the Arctic than any other nation and is leveraging its position to secure long-term energy dominance. And then there's China, positioning itself as a key economic player by funding Arctic infrastructure and forging partnerships with Russia to bypass US choke points in global trade. So the question remains, will the US succeed in turning the Arctic into another front for NATO expansion, or will Russia and China continue solidifying their dominance in the region, rewriting the rules of global trade and energy security? One thing is certain, this battle is only beginning, and as the ice melts, the race for the Arctic is only going to heat up. Everyone, thank you for making it to this point of the video, and make sure that you check out today's
A few hours ago, insiders in Kyiv said that the Ukrainian army's crushing defeat in the Kursk region had caused a wave of discontent among the Ukrainian military and the country's prominent political figures. Reports indicate that they are blaming Zelensky for the failure of the Kursk operation, which nearly obliterated the Ukrainian army's most experienced and combat-ready units. In addition, Zelensky's Kursk adventure claimed the lives of not only almost 70,000 Ukrainian soldiers and officers, but also deprived Kyiv of the best and most expensive Western military equipment. According to official data, since August last year, in the Kursk region, the Ukrainian army has lost 2,780 units of heavy equipment, including 391 tanks. Nevertheless, Zelensky continues to propagate falsehoods, claiming that the Ukrainian army has allegedly fully accomplished its task in the Kursk region. At the same time, Zelensky refuses to comment on the numerous footage of the shameful flight of Ukrainian soldiers from the Kursk region, as well as the catastrophic situation of the remaining Ukrainian units that were completely surrounded in this Russian region. Even the President of the United States, Donald Trump, asked Vladimir Putin to show mercy to these Ukrainian soldiers and spare their lives. Nevertheless, despite all this, Zelensky continues to behave like a winner, ignoring criticism and accusations of lying. So, on the morning of March 15th, during an interview with Western journalists, this dead man walking, in all seriousness, said that the Kursk operation had performed its task, allegedly preventing the Russian army from advancing in several directions at once. At the same time, Zelensky preferred to hide the fact that during the Kursk operation, the Russian army liberated a significant part of Donbass, taking control of cities such as Seladovo, Korokovo, Toretsk, and Ukrainsk. I want to thank the Ukrainian army for the Kursk operation. The Ukrainian army coped with its task. We achieved pressure reduction in the Kharkiv and Pokrovsk directions of the front. I think the situation in these directions has stabilized. I am sure that now the Russians will not be able to capture the city of Pokrovsk, Volodymyr Zelensky said. Commenting on this statement by the head of the Kiev regime, an authoritative German military expert and retired colonel, Wolfgang Richter, said that Zelensky is blatantly lying. According to the German officer, the main purpose of the Kursk operation was to stop the Russian army's offensive in the Donbass, distracting the main Russian forces in the Kursk direction. However, as time has shown, the Russian army's offensive in the Donbass has not only not been stopped, but has also increased significantly, as a result of which Ukraine has lost almost all major cities in the region in a very short period. Currently, Russian army units are quite successfully advancing both in Pokrovsk and Kharkiv directions of the front. Moreover, the German officer also noted that Zelensky's Kursk adventure had completely undermined the Ukrainian army's combat capability. According to him, Kyiv has lost almost all of its elite units in the Kursk region. And the negative consequences of this failure will soon be felt by the Ukrainian army in all key directions of the front, including Donbass. It is also worth noting that the shameful flight of the Ukrainian army from the Kursk region deprived Kyiv of the so-called last card, which Zelensky planned to use during future negotiations with Moscow. For 7 months, this political clown has constantly stated that Kyiv will use the Kursk region as a bargaining chip. For instance, in December 2024, during an interview with American journalists from CNN, this comedian in all seriousness said that during future negotiations with Moscow, Ukraine would exchange the Kursk region for the territories occupied by the Russian army in Donbass and south of Ukraine. And, as time has shown, all Zelensky's statements were nothing but humbug. It looks like this clown was making these statements while under the influence of illegal substances. Moreover, even pro-Ukrainian military experts from the Institute for the Study of War were forced to recognize the Ukrainian army's actions in the Kursk region as a complete failure. In particular, American military experts bluntly stated that the Ukrainian army's invasion of the Kursk region became the most unsuccessful military operation in the last 200 years. The Americans acknowledged that during the 7 months of fighting in the Kursk region, Ukraine failed to achieve any of its goals, while losing significant forces and thousands of units of costly military equipment. Meanwhile, amid the Ukrainian army's failure in the Kursk region and the retreat of Ukrainian troops in Donbass, influential Ukrainian politician Mariana Bezeglaya made a statement that shocked the head of the Kiev regime, Volodymyr Zelensky. She notably recognized that dissatisfaction with the military political leadership and Zelensky himself is increasing in Ukraine and the West. According to her, the Americans, with the help of high-ranking officials of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, are planning the physical elimination of Volodymyr Zelensky. Moreover, this information was also confirmed by numerous sources in the Russian FSB. According to them, Zelensky's Western masters are seriously considering the issue of the physical elimination of the head of the Kiev regime. It is reported that the last straw for the West's patience was the Ukrainian army's failure in the Kursk region, which led to Ukrainian soldiers shamefully fleeing and abandoning hundreds of pieces of Western military equipment on the battlefield, including Abrams tanks. At the same time, all this abandoned Western military equipment was in perfect condition. The best Western weapons, including tanks and artillery, are now in Russian hands. The Americans will never forgive Zelensky that their tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and armored personnel carriers ended up in the hands of Russian engineers. In addition, the West cannot allow Zelensky to live, as he has made too many mistakes and knows too much about NATO's actions in Ukraine. Oddly enough, Zelensky's death is beneficial only to the West. The fact is that, unlike the West, Russia needs Zelensky only alive. Moscow needs to hold a show trial over Zelensky and sentence him to prison for numerous war crimes against Russian citizens. Secondly, if Zelensky ends up in the hands of the Russian special services, he will tell a lot of secrets that his Western patrons are so carefully hiding from the public. Thus, it becomes evident why, for a duration of 3 years, Russia, having all the necessary resources at its disposal, did not even attempt to eliminate this clown. At the same time, one can be sure that after the West physically eliminates Zelensky, the so-called Western leaders will blame Russia for everything, trying to convince the public that Moscow is the main customer of the murder of this so-called freedom fighter of the Ukrainian people.
It is March 14th, 2025, and we now have US President Trump pleading with Russian President Putin to spare the lives of the remaining Ukrainian soldiers in Russia's Kursk region. Now, as a reminder, they're in Russia. They took part in this incursion into Russian territory, and now they're crying for help now that they have been completely surrounded by Russian forces and that their incursion has been defeated. Trump is speaking out as if this is just a group of ragtag Ukrainians that stumbled their way over the border and got stuck. But Putin is pointing to the fact that, as Russian officials have been revealing this week, the crimes against civilians, the horrific crimes that were carried out by these Ukrainian forces during this incursion against Russian civilians in the Kursk region were horrific. And we are just now seeing just how gruesome and how bad things actually were on the ground. So as you have Putin drawing attention to that, he's also saying, hey, if these soldiers want to lay down their arms, if they want to surrender, then their lives will be spared. He's also calling on Kiev to order its own troops to surrender. So where could this go from here, and what does it mean for the overall conflict and those ongoing negotiations that seem to be happening between the US and Russia, and also the US and Kiev? We got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Andrei Martyanov, a veteran, author, and Russian military expert. Andrei, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
My pleasure, always.
Now, I'm glad I get to talk to you today. There's been a lot going on, so let's get into the latest here. So as we know this week, officials from the US and Ukraine got together in Saudi Arabia and decided that they would present Russia with a 30-day ceasefire plan without consulting Russia and apparently without listening to everything that Moscow has been saying for months now, saying that that would not be acceptable. Now, Russian President Putin did not come out with an outright no, but he did give a very diplomatic version of saying yet on this, right? He said there are a number of preconditions that have to be considered. This is a very complicated conflict. So how do you view his response to what was presented to him?
Well, he told them to go pound sand. So they thought that they can issue this childish so-called kindergarten level diplomacy, that they can issue some peremptory thing. Well, Russia can issue peremptory things on her own, and they are much more, weighted, so to speak. So yeah, it's just all maneuvering for the show or for PR and save the remnants of the forces in Ukraine and NATO forces there, and in some way to retain Ukraine, whatever will be left, as some kind of future arm against Russia. United States is in their, existential fight with Russia. The way United States today exists with its political and economic system, it's the existential enemy of Russia and Russian people. So, and Trump is no different. So he's just, less aggressive outright. The rest with Russia called the bluff immediately. And after today clownish request to spare the lives of those in Kursk, Mr. Vladimir Putin came out, and that one wasn't, how to say it, thinly veiled. This one was outright. They are terrorists. They have two options: surrender or die. That's it. Simple as that. So if Trump thinks that he can charm Russians into, Russian elites are way more experienced and educated and cultured than Washington, D.C. So they can maybe produce impression on some, I don't know, not in Moscow.
Yeah, it was interesting to me to see that statement that Trump made when he, I guess, posted on Truth Social, and he's calling out to Putin saying, I'm, pleading with you to spare the lives of the remaining Ukrainian soldiers. And then he says, God bless them all. And it's like you take a step back and you go, okay, what do we know about these soldiers? Well, they chose to, or rather, Kiev chose to launch this incursion into Russia's Kursk region. We're not talking about pre-2014 Ukrainian territory here. And then on top of that, Russia has been coming out this week and talking about the atrocities that these forces have committed against the Russian civilians in this region. So Putin isn't exactly in this position where he wants to, just send them all home. No, he's saying, hey, this is a very serious situation. And also, Russia has complete control here. What do you make of kind of how we've gotten to this point in the Kursk region and how the U.S. is, I guess, attempting to handle it? I don't even know how much attention Trump has paid to it beyond just this week.
Well, it was planned primarily in NATO and British. The United States also took part in the planning of this venturism, military amateurism, essentially. They said, oh, yeah, let's go, just invade Kursk, and then we'll get to the Kursk, we'll take the Kursk nuclear power stations. The guys evidently do not study well in military academies in the West, which are primarily a joke, academically. And so they ran into this wedge, which was initially about the size, 159 square miles. So it's half size of the New York City. and boroughs. And so, yeah, they killed to death 67,000 people. They're full thousands of the pieces of equipment. It's just unbelievable. 330 tanks. I mean, altogether 5,000, armored cars and automobiles. On top of it, they have like 1,000-something APCs. So it's just like complete devastation. You can look at the videos there and you see yourself. It's just absolutely littered with bodies. They committed unspeakable atrocities. So United States, it is well known, Europe and NATO supports neo-Nazi regime in Kiev. Simple as that. I mean, so and when Trump says the massacre since World War II, dude, take a look at what have been done to actually retreating troops in Iraq, the highway of death and all. There you go, So now they try to talk to country which is about to celebrate in May 9th, 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War. And they talk about some kind of, it's pathetic, really. It's pathetic. It's being laughed at. It's embarrassing for them. And as the famous dictum by Mikhail Kutuzov, one of the greatest Russian strategists who defeated Napoleon. Well, obviously French will never admit that Napoleon was defeated, but they are French, they're losers basically. So, and the question is that he stated, those who do not have forces to continue to fight, they cannot demand peace. Simple as that. They have been defeated militarily, and this is the way to basically face the reality. Plus, keep in mind, Russians were taking a lot of NATO so-called advisors or mercenaries. Well, most of them probably cadre officers and cadre soldiers. So SPOWs in Kursk, they were actually very effective as barrier troops. They are good at shooting into the backs of the retreating Ukrainian soldiers. They actually execute each other really well. So, and this is one of the concerns of Trump, I think so, that a lot of those people, many of them have been already taken POWs. So they will be singing as birds at the International Tribunal for the Crimes Against Humanity and War Crimes on the former Ukraine now Russian territory. And Kursk especially. Maria Zakharova the other day broke down in tears when she was talking about how children have been executed. So this is who United States supports. It supports Nazis, period. And nothing could be done about it. No matter how you play it, no matter how you dance around it, no matter how you maneuver, no matter how you try to charm yourself. Trump took, he had the chance since the January 20th to change everything. 3 days ago, he made a choice to make this his war. Now it is his war, and the United States is defeated already, and then Russians are not in the business anymore to save America's face. We're not talking about Europe. Europe is irrelevant. They are chihuahuas, and so Trump could have had at least some chance to save America's face. He didn't take this chance, and now he is being humiliated basically in the last 48 hours, non-stop. And nothing he can do about it short of starting World War III, in which the United States will cease to exist. Simple as that, and that's how it goes.
Yeah, it's been so interesting to watch Trump. I mean, we saw him just a couple of weeks ago sitting there with Zelensky in the Oval Office, telling him and the entire world, Russia is winning this war. Russia holds all of the cards here. And now it feels like he has completely forgotten that those words ever came out of his mouth, especially when it comes to the way that he's attempting to deal with Putin, right? He wants to meet with him in person, and Putin's sitting over here going, wait a second, you said we held all the cards and you were correct in that statement. Now, I do want to ask you about how we have come to this point in Kursk, because when you look back at last August, when Kiev launched this incursion, it's as if they thought that Moscow was going to direct all of its energy to the Kursk region, right? That they were going to forget about the Donbass and come over here and target Kiev's forces here, but they didn't do that. And instead, they have systematically taken on this incursion over the course of months, saying, hey, Kiev, yeah, you send some of your best and brightest troops here. We'll handle them when they get here. And now in this week alone, you see them really forming this cauldron around the Kursk region. You see, or specifically around the main town of Suja. And you also see this Operation Pipeline that has been even making some headlines in Western media when it comes to how Russian forces have targeted these Ukrainian troops. How do you see this battle in particular and kind of the way that Russia approached it?
Oh, Russia approach is the same as the Russians approach most of their wars. The problem is that NATO military are incompetent, including their top brass. They are incompetent people. They don't understand the war. They never fought one. All this, this nauseating narratives about, oh yeah, we defeated, 5-year-old kid in the sandbox, in Iraq. Really? Have you fought a real enemy? No, they don't. They don't understand. They don't have reference. What is being presented as the military history in, for example, United States military academies and even war colleges is a joke. As other professors who teach it there, they basically tell them fantasies. It's fairy tales. And so now suddenly they see the real war. The technology is backward from NATO. It's totally obsolete. And they don't understand operations. They don't. They never dealt with this. They don't understand what combined arms operations on the scale of even special military operations are. And so, they planned this because they thought, I wrote 4 books on that. United States, and let alone again Europe, those clowns from MI6, Chatham House, and whatever the hell is there, which is the pretentious, pompous morons. So they don't have strategic planning. They don't understand what strategy is. They don't understand the enemy, in Russia in particular. They live in this echo chamber because of the low intellectual level, enough to read their, what's the name on Foreign Affairs, the RAG by the Council of Foreign Affairs. They have State Department, which is a joke, Pentagon. There are no people of honor there on the upper crust who could come in and say, dudes, do you understand what we are dealing here with? Except they know there's nuclear weapons. That's about the level of the extent of their understanding of the modern combined arms operations. And that's what happened. That's why they killed, basically the West was already on the precipice, and now they are falling into abyss, and it's the end of the combined West, as we know, because the guys again, Russians have the program. Every 100 years, combined West gathers and goes to Europe to get its ass handed to them. So there you go. This is yet another one. So they learn nothing, and it's not actually absolutely not surprising, considering the fact that practically the whole military history of the West is confabulated. They confabulated the history of the World War II. We defeated Hitler. No, you didn't. So, and you don't even understand the scale and the intensity of the Eastern Front. Most of them, they do not understand. They don't study real strategies. They do not understand what a real military education is. So, and as a result, you have a bunch of the nincompoops there who think that, yeah, let's go, let's see. Well, they went in, the farthest they reached was 20 kilometers, I believe. And again, it was primarily by the small groups. And here we are today, it's gone. And so the rest of it, so 70,000, they killed the combined arms army there. And they killed the best of the best Nazi fanatics, best of the NATO mercenaries and things like that. So of course they're hurt now, and that's pretty much it. So the 18 and 14-year-old kids have been taken prisoners of war by Russians in Kursk. Women are now fighting in the front lines there. So there you go. That is why there's so much attempts to do the ceasefire, because their mobilizational potential is practically exhausted. The only thing that they have left is around 160,000 18-year-olds between 18 and 20. This is the last sperm bank for Ukrainian nation. So if they want to throw it in, the Russians gladly will oblige, and they will just basically grind it into their, just bloody pulp. And simple as that. That's why this whole hustle, this activity, suddenly, as per Trump, despite the some critical good appointments such as Tulsi Gabbard or Kash Patel. And believe me, Trump now is getting the real intelligence. That is why this panic. So is that he still retains all those warmongers, neocons, Christian Zionists, and all those, a bunch of the crazies. So yeah, the only thing which changed, as I already stated, is the modus operandi in terms of the public relations. He is a showman, always was, and will always remain so.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great point. And, as you were pointing out earlier, it's like Trump had the opportunity, right? He could have really changed course. He could have let this be Biden's war and said, you know what, I'm going to move on from it. But instead, he decided to make it his war. And he has done exactly that. And you see Kiev in this position where they had decided that Kursk was going to be their bargaining chip, right? That was what they were going to bring to the negotiating table. Clearly, Russia made a very decisive or had a very decisive victory on their end and saying, you are no longer going to be able to use this. But when it comes to any kind of bargaining, I mean, is there anything that Kiev or that the U.S. really has on their side at this point?
No, nothing. Nothing, literally nothing. I was short of the World War III, but then again, Russians will oblige too if it comes down to it, and US will cease to exist. Simple as that. So yeah, there is nothing, literally, Washington. I'm not talking about Europeans. It's pathetic showing. It's laughable. It's a circus. Today, Rutte says, oh yeah, Ukraine will be NATO. Well, he can say whatever he wants. Russians don't buy this. But the point is, they have to choose their own league when it comes down to warfighting capability and military history. United States is not in this league, bar some, outstanding performance of the magnificent U.S. Navy in the Pacific War, for example, Pacific Theater of Operations. How about they start learning the real history, not written by U.S. Army, by Wehrmacht officers who shaped the U.S. Army and their views on the war, while being, of course, losers. Well, of course, they always say that, yeah, there's a General Frost, or the Russians were just piled the bodies over us and things of this nature. So yeah, they have been moved and imported through the Operation Paperclip, and many of them literally wrote doctrines of the U.S. Army. As a result, they have no clue about the real history of the World War II. They don't understand Russians. They have no idea about Russian history. And yeah, as I already stated, when you learn from losers, who are you becoming? You're becoming a loser. And so it's simple as that, and that's what has happened. And this is now on the, and again, Russians not going to talk about Ukraine with the United States. Russians are interested talking about the rather more global issue of the modus vivendi, because United States still is a superpower. It's not as big of a power as they used to think, and militarily it's not even in the same league with Russian armed forces. But the point is that obviously there should be modus vivendi between two superpowers, but nobody wants World War III. Nobody wants, this horror to happen. Are Americans ready to talk? Who knows? As Al Capone stated, with the good word and the gun, you can get much further than with the good word, the kind word alone. So this is what is happening.
Yeah, and it's been interesting to watch it unfold too, because, you go back to Trump. I know he really wants to meet with Putin right now, but if you look at this current situation, time is on Russia's side. And so you see Russia in this position, they're like, sure, we'll talk. Let's have more meetings. We're fine with having plenty of dialogue. But when it comes to some of those preconditions that Putin brought up on Thursday, he also brought up the situation on the front lines. He said, look, we've got nearly 2,000 kilometers worth of contact lines. We need to talk about what would happen there if there were going to be some sort of an agreement, some sort of settlement. How do you view the situation on the front lines? And do you think that the U.S. even realizes how dire it's becoming for Kiev, given the fact that we're seeing Russian advances at nearly every point?
They should have been already in this state of shock when Putin started about half a year ago using the term Novorossiya. as they called Novorossiya. Well, I made actually the video about it, that look up what Novorossiya means when Putin says, well, yeah, you want those rare earth metals? Sure, let's go join, do the joint, mining that in Novorossiya. Novorossiya is, of course, is this wonderful strip from the Black Sea, from Odessa to Nikolaev, and going all the way to the all the left bank of Dnieper, and even some places on the right bank. So yeah, but now listen, this morning, although we're looking at a realistic number, probably 1,200,000 at least killed on the Ukrainian side, and about 2 million wounded. I mean, basically done for life. And we have the 7 to 8 millions of basically refugees running around, so other 6 millions of Ukrainians trying, some got to Russia, 3 million, others are trying to get to Russia, and Russians are filtering them. So, yeah, essentially, Ukraine is a virtual state. If not for the support from the West, it would simply cease to exist. And Russian conditions are very clear. Russia will control all of the Novorossiya, even if not necessarily, acquiring it, for now. So, and yeah, it's take it or leave it. I mean, they were warned. I was warning the United States in 2014. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. And now they, I don't want to use this very profane thing, but it's FAFO, as everybody knows. So they found out, and too late now, because their combined West is over, and United States probably will endure. Europe is done, and it was exposed for the paper tiger that all of it is.
Yeah, and it's also notable too, when you look at the way that Trump is handling this, as you were saying there, look, we know what to expect from Russia. We know what to expect from Putin for the most part. I mean, he may come out and surprise us every now and then, but his rhetoric hasn't changed. It has been spot on. If the US wanted to learn and really study Putin, they have plenty of material to do so. What are your concerns about where Donald Trump stands when he starts to get frustrated? Because right now, yeah, he's ramping up sanctions in a way against Russia, right? He's continuing the military aid. He's continuing intelligence sharing with Kiev. So what are your concerns about what Trump could do if he starts to really try to, quote unquote, turn up the heat on Russia, even though we all know how that's going to turn out?
Yeah, I mean, that's the only thing he has at his disposal. What, does he want to start World War III? Well, be my guest. Russians have been ready for World War III for a long time. It's just that, suddenly he is getting frustrated because he's being humiliated, essentially. He is being paraded in a very polite way, which is even more humiliating. They expected Russians to say, oh, go screw yourself, and he said, yeah, you see, yeah. No, Russians do it politely, and they basically parade him as the paper tiger that he is. And yeah, what's left? Sanctions, yeah, ISR, military aid. I don't think so. United States has resources anymore, unless they want to go and completely ship their whatever their table of equipment and organization, essentially, of the U.S. Army there. But it will be annihilated no matter what. So yeah. It's basically the end of the road in terms of this American elites or Western elites in general, who are, as I already stated, highly ignorant, highly uneducated. Essentially, they do not produce statesmen. They produce politicians. Or Mr. Trump, apprentice, shows, those grandiose statements and things like that. So yeah, that's the end of the road. But the only thing they have is to try to move grossly inferior U.S. army to the Europe, and start fighting Russians. See what's going to happen. So, and Russia has now 700,000 people in the reserve, highly trained, extremely well-equipped, state-of-the-art army, and they just keep it just in case if they have to go to the western borders of.
Yeah, it's yet another reminder that, hey, it did not have to be this way, right? How many times has Russia tried and has Russia almost pleaded with the West of, hey, we don't want it to get to this point, right? We've made it very clear what our concerns are, and the West refused to listen time and time again, and they kept poking the bear, and now we see these escalations, and they still don't see the writing on the wall.
Yeah, being uncultured people, and they don't have culture. They're not refined people, most of them. When you look at answer them, they're thugs, most of them anyway. You know, look at Victoria Nuland or this American media primarily. Even Tucker Carlson stated, you know, I quote him, every other of them is an asshole. You know, so they are primarily American media is 80% of the jerks. You know, many of them are war criminals, and so they do not understand things, you know, which cultured people with tradition, and you know, try to tell you, we don't want to kill you, dude, but you know, just don't do that. And they say, oh, it's weakness. They are weak. They are, you know, and then you cannot explain to these people. Did you see what happened to those American generals who have been around all over the place? They paraded themselves as clowns. They are incompetent. How they were becoming, you know, 4-star generals, and like the dudes wouldn't be able to command the freaking battalion in the Russian army. They would be laughed at, you know. So, and this is what it is. And you cannot change this because they talk themselves up to the point of, you know, with egos larger than cathedrals, you know, and yeah, we are so good. No, you're not. So, and this is the fact that they cannot face. And because many of them are actually cowards, you know, it's one thing to go and kill the Afghan, you know, peasants and Taliban, which is primarily, you know, armed with their RPG at best and IED. Try to survive when you have 152 millimeter shells landing around you, and then you have Mr. Iskander flying in. You know, so you don't survive those things. You know, so and you have the whole doctrine, you have the whole set of the field manuals and operational manuals going to waste. It's garbage. They were written by people who were not ready to fight real war. You know, they still think that they can maneuver. Well, some. There are now serious military professionals in U.S. Army who explain that, yeah, you cannot maneuver really. So, you know, and what can I say? It's a catastrophe.
Yeah, and they've literally given Russia the last 3 years to prepare, right? In a way, they've given them 3 years to really get it together with their military to prepare quite literally on the battlefield. Russia's ready or could be ready for a much larger conflict. And you look at the US and all of its allies in NATO, and it's like not a single one of them is remotely prepared. Instead, they've just been throwing, you know, money, weapons, whatever at the problem and acting like that's somehow going to lead them to defeat Russia. It defies logic, but I guess we shouldn't be surprised at this point.
No, we shouldn't be. Yeah, it's all of it has been prepared since the times of the post-World War II conflict, where the United States legitimately and justifiably shares the title of the victor in the World War II overall. Obviously, it is all about shares, you know, who did what. But there's no doubt about it. But in another matter that Russians correctly view it as that the United States got into the Europe too late to just. Basically, it was about stopping Red Army, not about, you know, just really defeating Hitler. But the point is, since then, which war did U.S. Army win since then?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody can show me the money, as you were good in show me the record. You know, we apply for credit cards. I don't, but, you know, we apply. And what do? They check your credit score, you know. Show me. Don't show me this 5-year-old, you know, beating in Iraq. Wasn't in the war. And when you look at answer to what, which wars did, well, Grenada. Yeah, we can say Grenada. Right. It's one Grenada. So, and yeah, show me the record. Show me where your concepts worked in the real scale. They can't. And that's the only thing they have. It's like, you know, Al Bundy from Married with Children. The only bright memory he had was his 4 touchdowns playing for Polk High School in football. So they have these 4 touchdowns with Iraqi army, which are semi-literates on the train. Oh yeah, we were great. You know, it's just like, So there you go. That's Al Bundy moment. And then suddenly they encounter what NFL team, and they're not ready. So simple as that. And as the result, we have this. It's a combination of the political, economic, and military crisis in the United States and in the combined West. And it is millennium event. So we are looking at the decline of the West. Essentially, not just decline; it's complete departure. Especially when you look at Europe, I don't think so. It's recoverable.
Yeah, and they did this to themselves. They went out there, they picked those fights, and it is just sad in some ways to watch, but also at the same time, you have to remember, hey, they chose this battle, and now Russia is responding. There's certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Disturbing videos, strange and odd news stories, and as always, let's go ahead and get right into today's video. So we definitely have some crazy things to talk about in this video. We have more plane incidents. We had an incident involving an American Airlines plane and another incident involving a passenger. The scene was so chaotic on that flight, the other passengers actually used the words possessed and demon. And this is something I have been talking about going all the way back to 2023. This again is happening right before takeoff, like I've also said previously. We now are looking at a pattern here. We have been looking at a pattern for quite some time now, but again, it's just becoming more and more evident. But first, let's go ahead and start with the smoke engulfing this plane. In this first disturbing video, just more bad news when it comes to planes, more bad news when it comes to the aviation world. Yesterday, passengers on an American Airlines flight were evacuated onto the tarmac of an airport in Colorado as a fire broke out on the plane, sending smoke billowing into the air. Now, am I having deja vu? Didn't this happen to another flight carrier about 2 weeks ago? Reading this article from NBC News, which was published 2 weeks ago, Delta flight makes emergency landing, deploys slides in Atlanta after haze reported in plane. This NBC article goes on to say, this marks the second smoke-related issue to impact a Delta flight within a week, just 2 days after an Australia-bound flight returned to Los Angeles due to smoke on a plane. So a couple days prior to this article, there was another Delta flight in Australia that had smoke-related issues. 2 weeks after this article, we had an American Airlines flight with smoke issues. Let us also not forget, I believe it was just a month ago, where a United plane, its engine caught on fire, there was smoke everywhere, and the passengers, they had to evacuate down a slide. They just do not want people flying. And this has been going on for quite some time now. I have been covering these stories at least for 2 years now. And I have noticed just how sloppy they are in TSA, where they're just letting anybody walk past without a ticket and board these planes. They are being sloppy in air traffic control. Maintenance is especially sloppy, where they are allowing fake parts meant for older planes in shorter distance. They are putting these parts on newer planes meant for longer distance. And remember all the stories we were hearing about whistleblowers coming out and speaking out. We had 2 whistleblowers speak out where they were taken out back to back. And, we were hearing all these news stories about how these Boeing planes, the parts were falling off. And now in 2025, we're hearing about all these plane crashes left and right, smoke billowing inside planes, the engines catching on fire, and so forth. And again, this is just impacting people mentally. And there are now news articles coming out where they are saying that ticket sales are way down because people just do not want to fly. And again, that is the goal. Look at this news article, which was published by the New York Post. This was published on March 13th. Fear of flying is hurting ticket sales after multiple plane crashes, Delta and American Airlines. And these are the 2 carriers where we had these smoke incidents. And these are also the 2 airlines that had plane crashes. The article goes on to say flight anxiety has taken off and sales are crashing. Since this year started, there have been a string of collisions and scary incidents, and American confidence in air travel has diminished, prompting some flyers to back off on their travel plans, according to 2 airlines that had crashes. I mean, I even have friends in my own life that are telling me they will never fly again. This article continues to go into how airline companies and their investors are noticing just how badly ticket sales are doing as of 2025. But again, this is the goal for the 2030 agenda, control travel. And can you really blame people for not wanting to travel on planes? No, you can't. Nobody really wants to be a part of a PSYOP 30,000 feet in the air. But going back to this American Airlines plane, which had smoke inside, there were no reports of serious injuries, although the airport later confirmed 12 people were taken to the hospital for minor injuries. The flight took off from nearby Colorado Springs and was on the way to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport in Texas, the FAA said in a statement to the BBC. The plane diverted to Denver around 17:15 local time after the crew reported engine vibrations, the FAA said. After the plane landed, it caught fire while taxiing on the tarmac at the airport. American Airlines said the plane had 172 passengers on board, along with 6 crew members. All were evacuated safely, the company said. It added that the plane was a Boeing 737-800 and experienced an engine-related issue. Just another day, another plane-related issue. But we are not done here talking about planes, as we had another plane passenger lose their mind. Reading this article from the New York Post, it's titled, "Wild Video Shows Possessed American Airlines Passenger Who Swallowed Rosary Throw Punches at Crew." Yes, this passenger absolutely lost it right before, I think it was either right before takeoff or just as the plane was taking off. Once again, like I have spoken about in numerous videos, right before or just right after the plane takes off, these passengers just lose their mind. Well, this passenger, he swallowed a rosary. And again, like other passengers were saying, he was acting like he was possessed by a demon.
An unsettling flight from Savannah, Georgia to Miami leaves passengers shaken after they say a man on their plane began behaving erratically. Witnesses say he started screaming and stomping when the wheels went up. I'm Jim Barry. They say he then swallowed rosary beads and kicked a flight attendant in the chest. CBS News Miami's Anna McAllister joins us live from MIA with this exclusive. Anna, bring us up to speed on this.
Well, Jim, I spoke to a passenger that helped to take this man down, and he tells me this entire ordeal was the most disturbing thing he's ever experienced in his life. This Savannah flight bound for Miami hit turbulence just moments after takeoff, and we're not talking about the skies.
Myself and my friend were talking, we're like, we could have to take this guy down.
Rob Rosenberg was on this Monday night flight when he says a man, later identified as 31-year-old DeLonge Augustin, started violently shaking and screaming moments after takeoff. Rosenberg says the crew and passengers initially thought Augustin was having a seizure.
He started stomping his feet violently, like heavily, and screaming. It was kind of a chant. He was talking about devils and possession, and it was like, you have to kind of see it to believe it, sort of thing.
According to the criminal complaint, when Flight Attendant 2 approached Augustin to check on his welfare, Augustin turned in his seat, lifted his legs, and kicked Flight Attendant 2 in the chest.
He was being so violent, you were like, this is not normal.
Police say after he kicked the flight attendant, the pilot decided to turn the plane back to Savannah. But Rosenberg says the man continued causing a scene by kicking the back of another passenger's seat.
Destroyed this other man's seat. Like, he kicked it and punched it and just buckled the seat completely over.
Rosenberg says once they were grounded, Augustin once again became violent.
He just charged the front doors of the plane, like swinging wildly.
That's when Rosenberg, his friend, and another man took Augustin down. Rosenberg says Augustin swallowed rosary beads while on the ground and was gripping onto his sister during the takedown.
She had a bun in her hair, and he grabbed hold of her bun in her hair, and he grabbed hold of her pants and wouldn't let her go. So they tased him once, twice, 3 times. He still didn't let go. At that point, they had to cut the woman's hair to make him let go.
Rosenberg says Augustin was arrested while his sister sang what sounded like hymns.
They were possessed. That was a very, very, very disturbing scene. I've seen a lot of stuff in my life. That was probably the most disturbing thing I've ever seen.
And according to this criminal complaint, Augustin told his sister while they were on the flight that they were going to go to Haiti to flee from spiritual and religious attacks. Police also say that Augustin told his sister that Satan's disciples had followed them onto the plane. He is facing several charges tonight. But for now, reporting live from the Miami International Airport, Anna McAllister, CBS News, Miami.
This passenger incident is only coming a week after we had this woman take off all her clothes, banging on the pilot door, saying that she wanted off the flight right before takeoff. There are just so many different theories just as to what's happening to these plane passengers. And in my last video that had to do with that woman, I showed a chart that shows the stark increase between 2019 and 2020. 2019 was actually a time where more people had flown, yet there were more passenger-related incidents in 2020, 2021, 2022, and so forth. Now, people do want to go ahead and say that mental illness or drugs and alcohol could be involved here, and that is always possible. I always see this in the comment sections of these videos that I make on these passengers. Again, always plausible. But if we look at the chart, more people had flown in 2019 as opposed to 2020, yet we see just a rise of passenger incidents, almost triple the cases in 2020, 2021, and so forth. Are we really going to say that mentally ill people did not fly or did not fly in abundance back in 2019? People were not using drugs and alcohol back in 2019. So we have to make the chart and the numbers make sense. Now, we do know that another incident did happen back in 2020, and I did make that correlation when it came to the jab. Maybe something in the jab, certain people are not interacting well when it comes to planes. Or this could also fall into that narrative of scaring people from flying. Not only do people have to deal with something wrong with the plane, something maintenance-wise going on with the plane, but they also have to deal with passengers who, in the words of other passengers, are acting possessed by a demon. This is something I spoke about going all the way back to when I was talking about the woman known as Tiffany Gomas and Tom Cowling, that they could be a part of the agenda stopping people from flying. Because there were many similar stories as of 2023 of people saying that they saw something on their flight. We had the Chinese man, the Russian man, of course, Tiffany Gomas and Tom Cowling, among many others. There were even stories of passengers acting possessed by a demon. Look at this article, which was published by Fox News on November 24th, 2023. Flight descends into chaos when possessed woman begins screaming, jumping over seats. There's a real devil. After the outburst on the Frontier Airlines flight, authorities took the woman into custody. Look at this news story on January 5th, 2024. Unruly JetBlue passenger says he's the devil, allegedly punches female companion on diverted Boston-bound flight. So if these people are not seeing demons and devils and MFers that are not real on their flights, causing them to go berserk and delaying the plane, turning the planes around, they are saying they are the devil. They are saying they are possessed by demons. Now, and these are only just a couple of stories to name a few. There have been so many news stories from 2023, 2024, and now even 2025 that involve demons and planes. And I don't know what's going on here, but like I said previously, it looks like there is definitely some kind of pattern here. This individual, DeLang Augustin, he sounds very similar. His story sounds very similar to Tiffany Gomas and Tom Cowling, where they said they saw something that was not real, and he said he saw demons on his flight, that the demons followed him onto this plane. And this is when he caused this very big scene. Going back to Tom Cowling, he caused a very big scene on his flight because he said something next to him scared him. The Russian man at around the same time said he saw a ghost of Wagner Group mercenaries on his flight, causing the flight to be delayed. And then just a week later on that day, the Wagner Group mercenary flight had crashed on that same travel route. This is just something we don't see when it comes to other modes of transportation. Yes, when it comes to cruises and ships, we hear news stories of people going overboard. But when it comes to these party ships, like, for example, Royal Caribbean, we don't hear people saying that they see demons or have become possessed by demons, even though people are consuming large amounts of alcohol on cruise ships. When was the last story that you heard of somebody causing a great outburst on a bus because they saw demons or became possessed by a demon on a bus? Even when it comes to trains and fights go hand in hand. Trains and people acting very strange go hand in hand. But when have you heard a news story of somebody who saw demons on a train and started a big outburst because they saw demons? It seems like it's just happening on planes. And again, either right before takeoff or just right after takeoff, there's a big commotion about demons. And I would love to get into the whole supernatural aspect of it, and I will. I'll definitely go ahead and do so on my other channel, Seconds of Horror, where I do talk about paranormal, supernatural, and things along those lines. While there is a part of me that feels like something supernatural may be going on here, of course, when we're talking about demons and devils, there's also another side to me that cannot ignore the fact that the so-called powers that be want to stop people from flying. They want to control travel. And these stories are all a part of that narrative to stop people from flying, to scare people from flying. Because again, if they're not worrying about the plane crashing or something falling off the plane, they are also having to worry about passengers acting completely berserk because they saw something that falls along the lines of supernatural. But outside of planes, in this next disturbing video, have you ever been down the Mountain Dew rabbit hole or heard of the Mountain Dew theory, which states that every time Mountain Dew releases a new flavor, now don't get me wrong, Mountain Dew has many different flavors, thousands. I'm talking about every time they shine light on a certain flavor, make a big deal about a certain flavor, like in this case, conduct a TED Talk, something big happens not too long after, like a major event. What is even more bizarre is that that certain flavor that they make a big deal about among their many other flavors seems to correlate with that major event. For instance, this goes all the way back to 2001. In May, they released Code Red, Mountain Dew Code Red. Not too long after that, a few months after that, there was a major event that happened in New York. Flash forward to today, Mountain Dew is making a big deal once again about a certain flavor. This time, it's called Baja Blast Midnight. There are multiple content creators trying to come up with different theories as to what this new flavor that they're making a big deal about might mean. This video comes from Maverick Approach on TikTok.
Yet again, the Mountain Dew conspiracy continues. You guys, they just announced that they have a new flavor coming out called Baja Midnight. Now, I've never seen this, but Taco Bell, who is exclusively releasing this, did a TED Talk style event announcing it.
Bell's first ever new flavor of Baja Blast. Baja Blast Midnight. It is the flavors of the tropical lime storm that you love with a burst of passion fruits. It's going to pair with...
Now, what does this mean, you ask? So whenever they do a big push on a flavor like this, history has shown us something is about to happen. Now, last year when I showed you guys the flavor Pitch Black, we had the biggest IT blackout of all time. Not to mention, we had Infinite Swirl come out last year, and then we had all those crazy hurricanes and tornadoes. Also, I called this one last year where we had Star Spangled Splash flavor and the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse, and guess who wrote the Star Spangled Banner? Francis Scott Key. Now, this new flavor, Baja Midnight, could be referring to something like this, like the witching hour, which is at 12 o'clock.
Just a quick correction here, and nothing against the content creator, but the witching hour is said to be between 3 and 4 a.m., not 12 o'clock. But he still makes a very good connection here when it comes to something else that was seen on Netflix.
Releasing this doesn't help as well because that definitely looks like a serpent's eye. And the fact that you can see 3 6s in the bell right there. 6, 6, 6. Wait, hold up. That witching hour theory just kind of came together right now. Now, my last Mountain Dew video went crazy. It almost did 5 million, but get this. Mountain Dew themselves commented on that video and said, keep your voice down. This is just really good marketing, or it's just hidden in plain sight. Let me know what you guys think about all this down below.
There were even news articles spreading online about the Mountain Dew Maui wildfires theory. For instance, this news article here, no such thing as coincidences, Mountain Dew Maui burst theory erupts online in wake of wildfires because Mountain Dew had a can titled or a flavor called Maui Burst. So people were making a big deal about that. And I know some people were going to say it's just a soda, it's just Mountain Dew, it's just PepsiCo. But you have to remember the so-called powers that be, they put symbols, they give us the truth in plain sight in practically everything. It's not just movies, it's not just music videos or video games, but pretty much everything that the public sees, the mass public sees. So does it really surprise me that the so-called powers that be, they are using a very popular soda can to give the truth in plain sight through signs, symbols, and words? No, it really doesn't. No different than The Simpsons, how The Simpsons accurately, quote unquote, predict future events. But we know that the creators of The Simpsons, they are a part of the Free People Society. And I am sure many of these well-known organizations like PepsiCo are run by members of the Free People Society. But what does Baja Blast Midnight mean? Well, what does midnight mean? When you think of midnight, you think of darkness. To me, this comes off as a hint to a great blackout. And we have been getting many hints about this massive blackout, them taking down the grid. We are even getting news coming out how Canada is saying that they will leave parts of the United States in darkness. Now, I don't know if that's true or they'll actually do so, but that again plays into everything about a great power outage. Then on top of everything else coming out at a very interesting time is Netflix Zero Day, which is basically Leave the World Behind Part 2. And in that Netflix series, they are showing us a outage, the grid going down, hacks, planes colliding into each other, trains colliding into each other. And well, what are we seeing today? Planes going down, planes colliding into each other. And then not too long ago, a couple of days ago, we had a oil tanker and another ship collide into each other. Barack Obama's scripted movie, Leave the World Behind, was all about a hack, all about them taking down the grid. We are just seeing that in so many different forms of media. Blackouts, power outages, the grid's going down in repetition for a reason. We even had a Simpsons episode not too long ago talking about the Great Blackout. So if anything, this Baja Midnight just is another thing we consume where they are giving us the truth in plain sight about this Great Blackout. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this channel and you want to see more, please subscribe. If you're already subscribed, please like, as any engagement does help the channel grow.
Coffee. Follow me.